Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku's secret training involved learning knife skills? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. When Shoyuta had received a message from Izuku, he had felt relief. But it was short-lived considering the message he had gotten from the League not soon after. He wondered what had happened in such a short amount of time that they would be asking him if he could care of Izuku. Of course, he would, and they agreed to meet up to finally have his student come back. But nothing had really prepared him for the sight of his student to be held so carefully in the arms of the person who had decayed part of his elbow and almost killed Izuku on one of the first days of school. But just like how Izuku seemed so different compared to the first time he saw him, so did Shigaraki. The villain looked softer somehow, even wearing gloves that only let two of his fingers peek out. There was no bloodlust and there weren't even dismembered hands covering his body. Instead, Shoyuta could clearly see the face of someone younger than him but only a bit older than a third year at UA. Shoyuta wondered exactly what had happened in the weeks that Izuku had been with the League, how it might have changed him and the villains who were so silent now. There were 6 people he didn't recognize, but they weren't hostile. He assumed that they were probably wanted for crimes, but none of them looked at him as if he were a threat, and neither did he. The girl with space buns who introduced her as Toga and almost looked around Izuku's age had diligently explained the contents of the duffel bag and even warned him about knives with the concern of Izuku towards him. She had even given a kiss to Izuku's forehead which reminded him of Kaminari kissing Izuku's forehead in the infirmary while Dabi had called him princess as one would call a friend a nickname. It almost felt like they were saying goodbye, but that made Shoyuta feel uncomfortable. Izuku had been gone for weeks, he had been living with this group of people for a while and within that time they had managed to get close from the looks of it. Yes, Shigaraki and Kurogiri had almost killed him and his students, that was something he wouldn't forget, but it was difficult matching that to the person he saw now that held Izuku so carefully. Yes, they were criminals that probably had blood on their hands, but so did so many heroes. He didn't know these people. He didn't know how their hands became bloody or how much red dripped from their fingertips. He really didn't know them at all, but what he did know was that Izuku had been with them, that he found comfort with them and chose to stay with them. It would only cause pain if he were to never let them see him again. So he told them it wasn't really goodbye and that they could see Izuku again. He'd, of course, have to talk to the rat about it, but Shoyuta had a feeling that Yue's relationship with the LOV was about to change in a rather odd and big way, and maybe he'd get to know them and learn the reason why his student found comfort in them. When Shigaraki told him to take care of Izuku, he nodded and then turned to go. Shoyuta wasn't used to showing his back to criminals, but it was a small step to take in this new dynamic. As he walked, he could feel when they had left. He looked down at the student in his arms. The kid's arm was hooked around his neck, one hand gripping the back of his shirt, while his head was tucked into his chest. To Shoyuta, it almost seemed as if his student was trying to hear his heartbeat. When he started to walk, Izuku had shuffled a bit and seemed to press himself further into Shuta's chest. "You're comfy, Zawa," the boy seemed to mumble. When Shoyuta heard those words, it left an odd warm feeling inside. With a kid so comfortable in his arms that had never called him anything other than Aizawa-sensei or Eraserhead and had only started to open up to him before he disappeared, Shoyuta couldn't help but feel happy. Zoa? Not so bad of a name. Zashi will no doubt tease me about it. He looked down at the freckled face and sighed. "Problem child," he said softly before smiling when he heard a snort come from the kid. "Is something funny?" he asked, amused by the snort that followed and how Izuku still seemed completely at ease. The kid's eyes were slightly opened but looked down as Izuku spoke. "Nah, I just like it when you call me problem child," he said softly with his cheeks squished against his chest before letting his eyes fully close. "I like it. It isn't mean like that is." Izuku mumbled a bit unintelligibly before Shoyuta could understand again. "Thanks for not being mean." Shoyuta held Izuku a little tighter before asking another question. "Are you tired?" The boy hummed before responding. "Haven't slept for a while." "Why not?" "Just can't, happens a lot." "What do you do?" Just stuff. Shoyuta repeated. Zawa, what do you do when you can't sleep? Izuku asked, and Shoyuta had a feeling that the sort of delirium you felt after lack of sleep or too much sleep was the reason why the new nickname was said so naturally. He smiled. I read, go to the couch with a cat or two. At his response, Shoyuta could feel a sort of giddy tired energy from Izuku. I knew you like cats. I like cats, they're fluffy and warm. Izuku mumbled happily before it petered out. Shoyuta smiled as he kept walking. Well, if you want, I can introduce you to BSRD, and the other two who are less bastardly, he said despite knowing that Izuku wouldn't respond. He'd probably want to see those cats though, no doubt about it. If anyone could get BSTRD to like him, it would be Izuku. Shoyuta felt an odd sense of comfort walking down the path that led to where he lived with Hisashi on campus. It probably had to do with the fact that he was holding his previously missing student in a manner that kept reminding him the jokes of him being a dad come from his student Ashido and coworker Namuri. I'll never escape being called a dad if they saw me now, Shoyuta thought as he managed to unlock the door and get inside without hitting Izuku's feet on the doorway. He walked towards the couch and shooed away one of the cats that seemed intent on tripping him in the morning. An upset meow made him look to the side at none other than BSE. I cannot drop Izuku, so postpone the tripping BSTRD. I'm sure you'll find another opening in later today or try Zashi, he said to the cat. BSTRD as usual just blinked at him. Once at the couch, he managed to put the duffel bag on the floor before he started to set Izuku on the couch to sleep. Most of the kid was on the cushion before Shoyuta hit an impasse. Specifically getting the kid's arms away from around his neck was proving to be an issue. More specifically with getting Izuku to let go of the grip he had on the back of his shirt. Every time he lifted Izuku's arms and went to duck his head out of them, his shirt was pulled. Shoyuta got on his knees on the floor once he started to feel the lack of blood flow from lifting his arms too long. While that new position helped, it did nothing to decrease the strength of Izuku's grip on his shirt. Why is he so abnormally strong right now? He's asleep. After 2 more minutes, Shoyuta stopped. This isn't working. That was how he ended up worming himself out of his shirt and he could finally put Izuku's arms to rest on the couch, the kid's hands still gripping his shirt. Shoyuta stood up and looked at his now shirtless self in amusement and how Izuku proceeded to curl up to his side along with his shirt sleeping the whole time. When Hisashi came back from his particularly long overnight shift at the radio station, he was shocked at the scene before him. Specifically, because his husband looked calm for the first time in about a month and because the missing student that was the focus of his worry was sleeping on his couch. A familiar green head of curly hair. He looked at Shoyuta, who smiled and whispered to him, "He's back, Hisashi, he's back." As quietly as he could, Hisashi hurried to hug his husband with a smile of his own. When he came closer to Izuku on the couch, he noticed a familiar black shirt in the boy's gloved grip. "Sho, why does he have your shirt?" "Apparently he doesn't let go of things in his sleep," Shoyuta said, and Hisashi couldn't help but snicker. Shoyuta didn't seem to mind the laughter and just smiled softly at him. "How did he get here? When did he get here?" Hisashi asked, looking at the sleeping teen who seemed to be in clean clothes and showed no injuries and for some reason had gloved hands. "The league dropped him off this morning." Hisashi's head quickly turned back to his husband, who showed no sign of a joke. Shoyuta continued. "I got a text asking if I'd take care of him and obviously I said yes. Next thing I know, we were deciding a time for them to essentially hand Izuku over, and I mean literally. The kid was in Shigaraki's arms almost asleep when they arrived and passed him off to me along with a duffel bag of his stuff." He pointed at the duffel bag. "At the end of the couch. What's inside?" "Clothes, gloves, his sketchbook and apparently some knives?" Hisashi looked thoughtful. "Clothes, that good, and now he's wearing gloves. I wonder what the weight knives?" "Yeah, though the girl who gave it to me told me to be careful not to cut myself on any of them." "That's nice of them. From what you said and how he looks, it seems like they took care of him." Hisashi looked back at Izuku sleeping on the couch, and so did Shoyuta. The underground hero felt worried about how Izuku would be once he woke up and questions were asked, because there were a lot of questions. But most importantly about the kid's mental state that had seemed so troubled before he went missing. He looked back at Hisashi. "Yeah, and now it's time for us to take care of him too." "Swarm." That's the first thought that came to Izuku's muddled mind. Then he remembered bits and pieces. The sad smile Sora had on their face. Tamura picking him up and answering his question about it being time to go. He remembered the sight of green leaves against a dim sky early in the morning. He remembered feeling someone else's arm replace Tamura's and a heartbeat settling next to his ear that was oddly comforting along with a rough but soft voice. When Izuku opened his eyes, he saw a man sitting in what looked like a comfy chair looking at papers. They had dark hair tied up, stubble on their face, dark circles, and a familiar scar under their right eye. Aizawa-sensei. I'm at UA. That's when Izuku realized that the league had quite literally handed him over to Aizawa-sensei. He kept staring at his teacher. He had originally thought a while ago that leaving the bar would hurt, but it didn't. He knew the league cared, but like the past holders had said, it was time to go. Izuku very well knew that he needed therapy, and as much as the league understood and cared, they just weren't qualified for it. He felt a little relieved actually that this wouldn't burden them. A few of them could use therapy themselves. Then there was the thing Izuku has been sort of avoiding thinking about. His desire to be a hero. Not a hero like All Might, but just a hero. That was the dream he had since he was little. The dream that had been stomped on, tossed around, burned, cut up, and left for him to gently pick up off the ground. A dream that hurt just a little inside but also made him happy. That was what he wanted, so being back at UA wasn't bad. Maybe it made him a little sad, a little scared, but he remembered Aizawa's message. It had said that there were people at UA who cared and were waiting. Who would help him? He hoped that was true. Feeling that hope and fear, Izuku had clenched his hands and found that there was something already in them. Suddenly he remembered that he had grabbed onto what was probably someone's shirt, Aizawa-sensei's shirt. He remembered Dabi telling him he doesn't let go of things in his sleep. With that, Izuku realized that he made the underground hero, Eraserhead, his teacher slip out of his shirt because he didn't let go. Why do I do this? I can picture Dabi laughing at me now. Although that image was quickly interrupted by a furry face. More specifically a cat. It had peeked its head up from the floor, placing its paws on the edge of the couch while it stared at him. Izuku took in the different colored patches of fur and the yellow eyes that looked at him intently. He simply stared back. The calico cat didn't seem to mind. Instead, it kept staring, and after a few moments, Izuku watched as it lifted one of its paws and almost hesitantly placed it on his face. He could feel the slight roughness of the paw pad and soft fur on his cheek. He huffed in amusement at the action, which only made the cat seem more interested in him as it brought its face closer to his. Izuku could feel whiskers brushing against his skin. "See, I knew you would like you," a voice said. Izuku looked away from the cat that had yet to remove itself from his personal bubble and at the man who spoke. Aizawa-sensei smiled at him from his spot in the chair. "Hey kid." When he saw that, Izuku heard a sort of softness that he only heard a few times from the man. He remembered it from when he had been in the infirmary after his sparring match. That softness had made the pain a little more bearable. But at this moment, he also saw anxiousness in his teacher's eyes. An anxiousness that Izuku often saw in his own eyes whenever he looked in the mirror. "He's worried about how I'll react being back," Izuku concluded, and he couldn't help but feel warmth in his chest, reassured that Aizawa cared, and what he had told the league was true. "Hey Zawa." Shoyuta had been looking at papers when he realized that his student had woken up, but he gave him time to take it all in without any pressure. He had been worried that Izuku would wake up panicked and angry. But instead he seemed at ease. The kid was silent, and Shoyuta could feel those green eyes taking in his features for a bit until they were redirected around the room, and of course, on BA. The demon cat didn't care about the personal space of others and ended up in what looked like a staring contest with his student. That is until BSTRD decided to put its paw on Izuku's face. For a moment Shoyuta thought his student would get the signature series of rapid-fire bops that BSTRD loved to do, except that didn't happen. It was in fact very gentle, and Shoyuta was sure that Hisashi would be sputtering in envy at seeing that. Meanwhile, he was just amused, and so was Izuku, who didn't at all seem bothered. So Shoyuta said something about BSTRD, hoping it would be a good way to finally talk to him. The boy looked at him, and Shoyuta smiled before speaking again. And again, Those green eyes looked at him closely, as if they were taking in all the details about him, which wouldn't at all surprise Shoyuta. He wondered if the kid could see how nervous he actually was. Shoyuta couldn't describe the relief he felt at hearing the nickname the kid gave him again. Not wanting to let things slip into silence, though it would have oddly enough been a comfortable one, Shoyuta spoke again. It's 6:15 right now. The league dropped you off almost 2 hours ago along with a duffel bag which is by the couch right now if you want. He heard a hum come from the boy and Shoyuta took that enough as a response. I can move BSTRD away. It doesn't look like he'll move away from your face anytime soon, he said, gesturing to the cat that was still in Izuku's face and even proceeded to lick his chin. Izuku seemed to smile before bringing out a hand and settling it on BSTRD's head, which did nothing to stop him. It's fine, he's soft. I would hope so. The DMN thing insists on being brushed almost every day. Shoyuta was pleased by the delight he could see in Izuku's eyes as he continued to pet the cat who kept brushing his head on his face. Who knows I'm here? Me, Nedzu, and present Mike, Shoyuta answered Izuku bluntly, coming to the conclusion that Izuku would want him to be told truthfully instead of dancing around who knew. Nedzu obviously knew when the league showed up with Izuku and probably saw the whole exchange on camera while Hisashi found out when he got home. Izuku didn't seem bothered by the names he said. That's it. Shoyuta nodded. But I want to take you to the infirmary just to get a checkup. Don't worry though, recovery girl won't be there, Shoyuta quickly said when he saw how still Izuku got when he mentioned infirmary. She actually works fewer hours here and Nedzu hired some new employees that have experience working at hero schools and working with kids. There was visible relief in Izuku and he looked at him with a sort of disbelief in his eyes. Principal Nedzu did that? The hero snorted at the question. Of course the rat did. Despite his appearance and questionable morality, he cares about his students. When you were gone he looked into some stuff to make it better for students here, which included medical staff that didn't berate the student who got injured. And he wanted to make sure that incompetent people had the corresponding position. Of course, when he said, incompetent people, Shoyuta clearly meant the demotion of All Might to the position of an assistant that wouldn't be allowed to be with students unsupervised. Although, if the commission hadn't gotten in the way, Nedzu would surely have kept All Might from having any sort of position at his school. So with them out of the way, are you up to a visit to the infirmary for a checkup? Last time I saw you, you still had injuries and I just want to make sure you're okay. Izuku looked at him in silence before they looked back at BSRD. That's fine, he said quietly. Shoyuta nodded before getting up, walking towards the kitchen. Do you want to eat anything before we go? There's cereal, eggs, some leftover rice from what Zashi made since he always makes too. Much and dash. I'm not hungry. I haven't eaten in a while. Shoyuta turned back to look at him. Why not? Just didn't feel like eating. At Izuku's response, Shoyuta frowned. He didn't like the fact that they hadn't eaten. He thought of his own time when he didn't feel like doing anything, including eating food. Izuku had the same sort of look in his eyes when he said it. Alright, you ready to go then? Yeah. Making sure he had what he needed, Shoyuta let Izuku get up, but when he turned back he saw how Izuku seemed to take a deep breath before using his hands to push himself up. It looked like it took a lot of energy to sit up and BSRD had taken the new space to jump on and sit on the boy's lap. Shoyuta thought back to the text from the league, the way Izuku said he hadn't eaten or slept in a while. Figuring he was weak, Shoyuta knew it would probably take a while to get him up and moving to the infirmary. So instead he walked up to Izuku on the couch. He brushed BSRD off of him, which the cat did not take kindly to. Then he turned around and crouched down in front of Izuku, showing his back to him. Get on. Little did Shoyuta know that Izuku was reminded of a certain red-eyed individual with dry skin. Boo dash. No buts, Shoyuta quickly cut in. It's only makes sense not knowing your condition that I take you there. And it's the quickest option. Now get on, I'm more than strong enough to carry a teenage boy. He heard a sigh of someone giving in. Shoyuta only had a few seconds until he felt the weight of his student settling on his back. 2 arms hesitantly wrapped around his neck, and he could feel the brush of curls at the side of his head as Izuku settled his chin on his shoulder. He secured his grip on the kid's legs before finally getting up. For a moment he felt Izuku get tense, but once he started moving he seemed to relax. Then they were off. Shoyuta chose a path where they were less likely to come across anyone, although given how early it still was that wasn't going to be a problem. It was silent and the only noise was the wind and rustling leaves. That and the breathing of each other. Izuku was warm against his back and it was just a reminder to Shoyuta that Izuku was there, he was back. The anxiousness that had been following him around, making him feel unsettled, was gone. Eventually, they finally made it to the other building. Instantly, once Shoyuta stepped inside he felt Izuku's arms tight around him as they tensed up. He found himself giving a reassuring squeeze on one of Izuku's legs. Izuku gave a small squeeze in return. Although there was still some tension he could feel from the body he was carrying, Shoyuta made his way deeper inside and eventually got to the door to the infirmary. It was already open and standing inside was a woman who didn't seem surprised at their sudden appearance. Shoyuta knew for sure that Izuku was probably eyeing the woman and taking note of details, including any that could possibly pertain to her quirk. Morning. You must be Aizawa Shoyuta? She asked despite obviously knowing the answer while she looked at the boy on his back with a smile. It seemed that she didn't mind Izuku staring at her intently while he had his face resting on Shuta's shoulder. Shoyuta simply nodded in response. The woman took his silence in stride. I'm Dr. Tanaka Sachi and was told we would be checking up on your student. You can follow me into one of the private rooms, she said before turning and going towards one of the doors to the side. Silently they followed and saw that the room was just held one bed like the one outside, but alone with a chair on either side and a little table as well. Shoyuta walked up to the bed and turned around before slowly setting Izuku down gently on it so that he could let Izuku unwind their arms from his neck without falling off anywhere. For a moment it seemed that Izuku was hesitant to let go, but he did, and Shoyuta stepped away, turning to look at the doctor who now had something in her hands. She walked up and placed a bundle of folded clothes on the bed near Izuku. I'll go outside with Aizawa-san to let you change into these before we start the checkup, alright? Izuku nodded and Dr. Tanaka just smiled in return before turning to walk out of the room. Shoyuta looked at Izuku for a moment and gave him what he hoped was a reassuring look before he turned to walk out and give Izuku privacy to change. Once outside, with the door closed, Shoyuta started to wonder what they would find out during the checkup. Once again he felt an uncomfortable sensation in his gut. Izuku stared at the closed door for a few moments and back at the bundle of clothes now on his lap. His shoulders slouched forward when he sighed. He hadn't wanted to be left alone. The silence felt oppressive when he was left alone, but he didn't want to ask Aizawa-sensei for more than he already had. The man had already carried him twice, dealt with him not letting go of his shirt, and a whole list of other things that Izuku was grateful for. Sometimes it felt like too much. He was just so nice. So Izuku had let him leave. Not wanting to prolong the time in silence that only got louder the longer you stayed, he changed quickly. He took off the soft hoodie, revealing a torso full of scars that no doubt would probably be recorded by Dr. Tanaka and seen by his teacher. Majority of the scars were old, but there were some new ones. Burns from the final exam. Izuku was glad though that at least the cut that was on his lip hadn't scarred. Seiko had been adamant about taking care of it, even getting a cream to make it heal faster without scarring. Izuku wouldn't have been necessarily upset with a scar on his lip, but it was the memory connected to it. He didn't want a reminder of that final exam to be on his face. At least the ones on his body could be hidden with shirts and jackets. But one on his face would have been too much. He changed into the thin fabric of pants and shirt. The shirt had a string at the back that held it together while the pants felt flimsy. When he got back on the bed he crossed his leg and put a hand up to his chest. His gloved fingers touched the marble that hung there. A few moments later there was a knock and a voice asking if it was all right to come in. Izuku managed to give out a quick yes. When Aizawa came back inside followed by the doctor, he noticed the necklace was in Izuku's hands. The doctor came up to the bed while Aizawa sat down in the seat at its side. All right, the woman said, I'll start with the checkup now. I will be using my quirk which allows me to take note of past and current injuries through touch. She lifted her fingers which showed that the pads of her fingers were different colors. Of course, if there is something that looks like it needs to be checked more we will use regular machinery and testing. So shall we begin? Izuku refrained from asking questions about her quirk and nodded yes. It was a series of normal tests, but still they made Izuku grip the necklace tightly in his hands. Simple things to check up on his eyes, mouth, and ears. Little things made Izuku tense up, remembering how harsh past doctors had been when his mother was dragged him to a checkup every 6 months. She wanted to avoid dealing with any health issues. The doctors he got never liked it when he showed up, and they made that clear with how rough they were in their instruments while Izuku forced himself to be silent. But this woman was completely different and Izuku didn't know how to handle it. Her touch was gentle, careful, purposeful. No movements were wasted. The unfamiliarity of it drove Izuku crazy. At least when she checked his breathing it was more familiar. The coldness from the instrument at his chest was the same and was still the same when she put it at his back. Eventually, when she was done doing those rudimentary tests, she asked for him to remove his shirt. A simple tug undid the knot at the back and the fabric slid off, revealing skin. Revealing the expanse of skin that told a story of a painful past. Izuku was unsure whether he should look at his teacher's face for a reaction. But that's pushed aside when the woman asks him to take off his gloves as well, since she would also have to check his hands. He took them off but kept them on his lap. The gloves and marble helped him immensely, and he wished he could thank Kurogyari and Seiko for them. Then once again Izuku was attempting to not squirm under the unfamiliar sensation of Dr. Tanaka continuing the checkup. While unfamiliar in an unsettling way, Izuku was also a bit fascinated with the doctor's quirk. The pads of her fingers seemed to glow dimly, and he could feel that they were slightly warm. He wanted to ask her how they worked. Although he did have a clue with how she went over his body as if it were a bunch of sections put together, like different parts of a machine. She did a circle around his head with her fingers, traced his cheekbones and a line behind his ears. She brushed her thumbs on his collarbone while her index fingers skimmed the tops of his shoulders. Her 2 thumbs ran down his spine on either side. Izuku noticed how the lines she seemed to be making were aligning with the bones in his body. But when she got to his lower back, the lines became more fluid, and if he had to guess, maybe they were aligned with the placement of his organs. Thinking about how she was using her quirk and her methodology made the discomfort feel less present. It also helped that when Izuku looked at Dr. Tanaka's face, it was completely professional, not at all showing disgust or worse, satisfaction. There was nothing to say that she was disgusted to be in his presence, to be touching him, or happy that many of the things she brushed over were scars. The scars were unavoidable. Izuku knew that by now Aizawa-sensei must have caught sight of that handprint scar from Bakugu on one of his shoulders. New on top of old, since Bakugu had the habit of going to the same shoulder, which Izuku was oddly grateful for. He didn't like the idea of having 2 matching scars on his shoulders. He wondered what his teacher was thinking. He wondered what the League thought when they caught glimpses of his scars. What they would have thought if he was as exposed to them as he was now with all of them in view. He wondered what his classmates in 1A would think, seeing as he did his best to keep out of sight when it came to change. Would they be worried? Scared? Disgusted? Indifferent? What would they think after finding out the reason why he had them? Izuku kept his gaze away from his teacher's face. After the doctor finished checking up his torso, she moved to his legs. The fabric loose enough to simply hike them up. There were fewer scars and not as many sections to outline. Then there were his arms and hands, as if leaving the most damaged for last, it seemed. There was no way for her to avoid the large scar tissue on the side of his right arm that he got from his quirk. Luckily there was not a matching one on his left. When she reached his hands, one of Izuku's fingers twitched anxiously. His hands were a fickle thing, bringing much pain after the repeated abuse of his quirk and broken bones, while also being the thing that allowed him to do so much. He already received a scolding from Recovery Girl countless times. He wondered if this was where Dr. Tanaka would not be different. But she didn't say anything. Instead, she ran her index finger along the bones underneath his skin on each individual finger. She went through each one, bending them at the different joints. She swiveled his wrist, feeling how the bones moved underneath his skin. Izuku could have almost guessed the doctor has an X-ray quirk with how intently she looked at both of his hands. "Do you experience pain in them?" she asked. He nodded. "Ever since the sports festival. But the gloves help and I do some hand massages." She seemed pleased by that. Last part of his response. That's good. Those are some good gloves for your injury and massages help. But I'm still worried about the extent of the damage, so later on, I'd like for you to come back so we can just focus on them. All right, Izuku said almost hesitantly when he realized that was all she was going to say. It seemed that she would be different from Recovery Girl in that aspect as well. Dr. Tanaka smiled at him. Now for results, I see that the injuries that were reported you had last time have healed. Your ribs are no longer bruised, the burns have healed up nicely, and I'm sure we can work something out for the scars they left behind. Also, the bruising on your arms and eye have gone away without leaving any serious damage to your eye or tissue. She paused to let the information set in, and Izuku wanted to smile remembering the medical treatment he got from Seiko and the others. But then the doctor spoke on a more serious note now that the good news had been delivered and he was out of any imminent danger. Now are you okay with me talking about your past injuries from before coming to UA in front of Aizawa-san, or would you like him to leave the room for a moment and have me tell him privately later on? She asked Izuku. Izuku thought about it and he looked over to Aizawa-sensei who was beside his bed. And the only thing he could see really on his teacher's face was one of caring. Just how many times had his teacher looked at him with that look? That look only solidified Izuku's thoughts. He didn't think Aizawa-sensei would judge him, not really. Anyways, he knew that Aizawa-sensei would end up knowing, so he figured it would be best if he heard exactly what the doctor said to him. Izuku looked back at the doctor. You can say it here, it's okay. She nodded at him and then began speaking again. During my examination I have noted that you've had years suffering from blunt force injuries, the severity increasing along with your age. This in addition to the cuts of varying lengths and depths. Many of these things seem to heal without professional medical help led to multiple scars, but some even with professional help would have scarred as well. I also know that you have experienced different levels of burns, most notably the scar on your shoulder that has been damaged even after it scarred over repeatedly. Since it seemed to be connected to what looked like explosive burns, I also saw signs of past smoke inhalation. Luckily that has not been so severe like what you would see from someone who was stuck in a burning house, except it's still dangerous. She took a breath. Currently, you do not have any injuries, but it's important to let your body have some rest due to how much stress had been put on it for so long, especially now since you are suffering from lack of rest and have not been eating. Then she didn't say anything more, which Izuku had to be glad for since he was still processing everything she had said. He felt like he was in a slight daze after hearing everything, hearing all the things he went through summed up in a professional manner. Memories of where he went, though all these things have seemed to be at the edge of his vision waiting to creep in at any moment. The sensation of the marble when he grabbed it kept them at bay, along with his teacher's voice. Can we get him some water and something to eat that wouldn't upset his stomach? The man asked. The doctor seemed pleased at his question. Of course. I'd be glad to. Then she left, quick to give the two privacy. It was silent between the two of them until the Aizawa-sensei spoke up again. I see that the necklace Aoyama and Yaoyorozu made has held up well. Izuku looked down at the necklace and smiled slightly at the memory of Momo and Aoyama working together to make a design just for him when they saw how much the marble meant to him. He liked to think that Seiko approved of their design. They did a good job with it, he said looking back at his teacher. The fact that the man wasn't looking at him any different eased previous worries. His teacher didn't get to say anything more when Dr. Tanaka returned with water and 2 packages. She was quick in passing one package to Aizawa-sensei when she set the water on the table at the side before giving the other package to Izuku along with a spoon. The two were only subjected to witness the woman's efficiency when she was quick to speak. You, she pointed at Izuku, are to rest here. While you are currently uninjured, it's important to take it easy. Your body is still under a high amount of stress. I do have concerns about the multitude of breaks you've had in your limbs and hands, which we can talk about plans and treatment later in an appointment. She turned to Aizawa-sensei, and you are also to eat that sandwich as I have been told by the principal about your eating habits. You can also rest here and give this young man some company. Aizawa-sensei and Izuku looked away from the doctor and at each other. Both of them seemed to have the same idea, looked back at the doctor and nodded. With that, Dr. Tanaka smiled and gave them a nod in return before leaving them as quickly as she had appeared with food. Izuku watched as the door closed before looking over at his teacher who had done the same thing. The man looked amused. "How are you feeling?" his teacher asked. The simple question threw Izuku for a loop considering all that had happened. Considering that there was no way that Aizawa-sensei had not seen his scars and heard about what his body had been subjected to. Izuku had thought that his teacher's first question would have to do with the doctor's findings, not his feelings. But then he was reminded of when Aizawa-sensei sat in a very similar spot the last time he was in an infirmary bed, saying that he cared and would listen to what Izuku had to say. So maybe that question wasn't much of a surprise. Unlike last time, All Might or Recovery Girl did not suddenly barge in, so Izuku answered him. Tired, hungry, and worried. Then Aizawa-sensei smiled at him, even let out a huff of amusement. "Thanks for telling me." Izuku stared dumbly at his teacher. "Thanks for telling me, thanks for sharing your emotions." For adding another thing on him, but he was acting like it wasn't. Izuku wasn't really used to that. He still wasn't used to it from the LOV at times. But even if it was something he wasn't used to, Izuku couldn't help but like the amused smile his teacher had when he asked, "Wanna eat together?" Shoyuta had to admit that the sandwich was good, but he was more concerned with making sure that he saw Izuku eating. They were, seeming not to have any issue with the little cup of what looked like pudding, which was relieving to see. So Shoyuta turned his attention back to his sandwich and what he saw during the checkup. Izuku had stiffened when being tested. He gripped the necklace like it was a lifeline, and maybe it was. Shoyuta figured that with his previous quirkless status that any doctor visits must have been unpleasant. He would be surprised if they weren't. It made sense, but still made him feel rage simmering in his gut. That rage stayed, curling around deep inside, waiting to grab and rip into anything that came close when he saw the kid's scars. Of course, his face wouldn't reveal that. Instead, it was a mask of calm after years of training. What he revealed through his expression. While he was letting some things slip out like amusement and just a little bit of affection, he didn't think it would be good for Izuku to see his anger. A certain handprint-shaped scar on his shoulder made Shoyuta feel ashamed as well. Knowing that one of his previous students had done that and that he hadn't protected Izuku from him soon enough. No doubt that rat of a principal would be letting out his claws at seeing all the other scars, old scars that looked like they came from all sorts of incidents spanning years. Shoyuta also had a feeling that the rat would hurry up his investigation into a certain school. Now that his missing student was back, he could put that clever, scary mind to taking what looked like a handful of people to jail. Probably try to change some policies while they were at it, most likely. This feeling was only confirmed when the doctor listed the other injuries the teen's body was subjected to before UA. Cuts, blunt force trauma, smoke inhalation. It didn't paint a pretty picture. But throughout all that, he made sure to keep his face calm. He didn't know how the kid would feel if he got angry on their behalf or dare he looked at him in pity. Izuku didn't need that. He didn't need to be judged. He needed to be taken care of, supported, treated like everyone else. Something that they had been seriously lacking for the last 12 years or so. Something else Shoyuta thought his student needed was someone who didn't try to hide things from him and let him make his own decisions. That's why he was giving Izuku some more control of getting the checkup and whether they wanted him to be there when the doctor was going over their findings. That was also why he was going to ask Izuku how they wanted to go about the questioning that would have to be done. But of course, before he could finish his sandwich and ask, Izuku beat him to it. "Is Detective Tsukachi going to question me?" Izuku asked, looking at the spoon in their hand rather than at him. "Yes. But you won't be alone. It's just to know what happened." "You aren't in trouble," Shoyuta said, not wanting to give the impression that it was an interrogation as if they were a criminal. Izuku's head turned quickly to look at him with wide eyes. "I'm not." Shoyuta shook his head. "You're not. But there are questions about what happened so that we know if there's something we need to be worried about for you." Shoyuta made sure to catch Izuku's eyes when he said the next part. "I'll be there with you and you can decide when you want to do it." There was a short silence before Shoyuta got his answer. It gave him an opportunity to see his student think and grab the spoon a little tighter before answering. "I want to do it now," Izuku quickly said. "I want to get it out of the way." With that, he turned back to take another spoonful of pudding out of his cup. Meanwhile, Shoyuta took a bite of his own food. It was nice to see that determination in his student again. All right. Eventually, the two of them finished eating and Izuku diligently put his trash into Shuta's open waiting hand when he stood up with his own trash. Shoyuta left the room, to give Izuku some breathing room, throw the trash away, and also make a quick phone call to the detective. He had just thrown the trash away and taken out his phone when suddenly Dr. Tanaka was in front of him with a determined look on her face. Before he could ask what was wrong, she was already asking her own question. Aizawa-san, I take it that you and Principal Nedzu will ensure that your student gets the necessary treatment for his mental health while I take care of physical health, correct? Shoyuta was reminded that he should properly thank Nedzu for hiring Dr. Tanaka after seeing her interact with Izuku and now looking at him straight in the eye without an ounce of fear. We will, he said. With his answer, that face of determination faded into pleasure and she nodded once at him. Good, she said before walking away. Shoyuta sighed, just a tad amused before calling the detective. Not long after Aizawa-sensei came back into the room did a man that Izuku recognized came in too. Izuku had met him before. A man with a lie detector quirk would be able to tell them if what he said was the truth or not. At least that was the most basic function of the quirk. Izuku was sure that it was a bit more complex than that. But he remembered this mostly because All Might had told him. All Might had said that the detective knew about One for All. His mentor had said, "Young Midoriya. Not many know the secret about my quirk, but the detective is one of them. He's helped me out a great deal throughout the years." It made him nervous. He watched the man pull up another chair and take a seat beside his teacher. When the man finally sat down, Izuku also remembered something else. His mom wasn't there. If he remembered correctly, he was supposed to have his parent with him when being questioned or dealing with the police, but that woman was nowhere. Was she coming? Aizawa-sensei said only Principal Nedzu and Present Mike knew about his return, but what about his mom? Shouldn't she be here? Detective, where is my mom? He asked, forcing himself to continue breathing normally, which was difficult from how tense he was. He could feel pain building up in his hands. At his question, the detective looked up slightly confused before realization showed on his face. While you were missing, she was arrested and convicted of neglect and child endangerment, the man said. She hadn't reported you missing at all, and we only found out after Present Mike visited your home since you didn't show up to school. Izuku froze. He wasn't surprised that she hadn't reported him missing. After all, it had taken a while for Dabi to congratulate him on officially being missing. There were countless times when she barely looked at him and he gladly stayed out of her sight. But at the same time, there were days where she hovered and demanded to know all the details about what he was doing and where he was going. It was a dramatic change that he could never tell was going to happen, and all he could do was go along with whichever mood she was in. On one hand, he grew distant and lonely, while on the other hand, he felt like he couldn't breathe without her saying something hurtful or her eyes burning holes into him. It was exhausting. It was a surprise, though, that she had been arrested and actually convicted. He never thought that would happen. Usually, whenever people met his mom, they pitied her and in a mocking way, said she was so strong to raise a quirkless child. Never had they shown concern over how he parented him. It was nice that someone finally did something, showed concern. Except this meant one of his teachers went to his home. One of his teachers talked to his mom. Listened to the things she said about him. How he was a burden. How he was weak. How he constantly caused trouble. That she was up to her nose in stress with him burdening her. What has she told Present Mike about his troubles at Aldra? The calls she never took and meetings she never went to about fights or disturbances he caused. She wouldn't have said anything nice, and his teacher, Present Mike, was nice, but if he heard all that, wow. It was a gentle tap to his arm that made him tense even more, and he stopped from flinching at the pain in his hands. But the tap brought him out of his thoughts, and he found himself looking at the detective, who had a concerned look on his face. We know that everything your mom said about you was a lie. You're a good kid, all right, Tsukachi said. Izuku wanted to believe their words, but another worry crept in. I can't go in the system, he said bluntly, looking at both the detective and Aizawa-sensei. He waited for their reactions. But all he got was seeing Tsukachi looking over at his teacher. You aren't going into the system, his teacher said reassuringly. UA can take custody and there are dorms now. There's a room waiting for you on campus. And regarding having a guardian, I hope you don't mind it being me. It also helps that have a license to foster along with my husband. With present Mike? Izuku couldn't help but ask. Izawa-sensei raised an eyebrow at him and Izuku remembered that the man never explicitly said who they were married to and he just figured it was him. Yeah, him. Izuku couldn't help but feel a little smug that he had been right. The first bit of questions was about basic information. His age, name, date of birth. Although when Tsukachi called him Midoriya, he hesitantly asked that he just be called Izuku. That's perfectly fine, Izuku. Now, are you ready for the other questions? Tsukachi asked. Unsure whether he was actually ready, Izuku just nodded yes to the question instead of verbally responding. No one called him out on it, which he was grateful for. Alright, is it true that you were injured after your final exams? Yes. How did you leave campus? Izuku remembered how he left without saying a word. I just grabbed my stuff and left. I didn't talk to anyone and just went home. Did you reach your home? Yeah, but then I was going to get some burn cream. There wasn't any left in the bathroom. So you went to the store? Yeah. There's one not too far from home and I got to the aisle where they have all the medical stuff by then. Izuku thought about how he seemed to drift off with his thoughts, the words pathetic echoing in his head. He drifted a lot. And from the research he had done late at night throughout the years, he thought he knew what it was. I think I dissociated in the store, Izuku finished saying. The detective seemed interested in that. Does that happen a lot? They asked. Yes. There were many times he found himself in his mind only to be brought back slowly by someone else after some time had already passed. Do you remember what happened next? I was with the League next, Izuku said, remembering how Toga's hands were warm when they held his face and she looked so happy when he finally saw her. At the next question, the detective looked a little more serious but didn't let that show in his voice. Did they hurt you, threaten you? Izuku frowned at that. No. They actually helped me with my cut lip and burns. Not once had they hurt him. What happened next? Izuku shrugged at the man. Then I was just there, he said simply. They didn't question me about UA or information about the teachers to hurt them. They didn't hurt me. Just kind of took care of me. At that, the detective paused and looked up from the notepad where they had been writing notes in. Took care of you? Yeah. Gave me food, stuff to drink. Even made me take a shower and got me clothes and… Izuku grabbed his glove and cradled them in his hands. These gloves for my hands. Izuku looked at the detective and Aizawa-sensei. His hands raised the gloves slightly towards them. They did all that to take care of me. Naomasa was a little unsure of what to think. It was already a complicated case. One of Aizawa's students had gone missing, supposedly kidnapped by the League only to be returned unharmed by them to Aizawa. Naomasa of course knew that Izuku was the holder of OFA, the successor that Yagi had told him about. So he sort of knew Izuku in a way, but during the questioning, he realized he really didn't know the kid at all. Yagi had said a lot about Izuku, but the person he saw in the infirmary bed wasn't like anything he described. He could see why Aizawa had been so worried during the past few weeks. The kid looked tired, like exhaustion clung to their bones. It was worrisome, and Naomasa only found more reasons to be worried when Izuku had said they dissociated and it was something that happened often. The answer, though, did make sense as to why the man with scars had pulled them through the warp gate without any resistance in the security footage from the store. But apparently, after being pulled in, the League didn't question Izuku. They took care of him. That wasn't what Naomasa had been expecting, but it was the truth. Although, the truth was a tricky thing. The lack of details that Izuku gave and how he was vague on some things showed that. But even still, he didn't think the teen was lying. It seemed to be more about keeping certain details unknown to him. Izuku was still answering his questions truthfully about the important things. Can you tell me where you were? He asked, hoping to get a location. In a bar. I don't know the address of where it is though. It's in a shady area I've never been to before. Naomasa mentally applauded the wording Izuku chose. A bar in a shady place with no specific address. There were thousands of possible locations that fit that description and each of them were possible considering Kurojire's warp quirk. Naomasa almost wanted to laugh but withheld it. Instead, he prepared himself for the next question because this was one that always upset people. I have to ask Izuku, but are you a traitor or working with the villains? He was relieved when he didn't get an angry response. Instead, Izuku answered right away. No. I didn't give them any information to harm any civilians or heroes. And I'm not a traitor or villain. Along with that indication, Naomasa thought that this was enough. Izuku looked tired and tense. It was best to stop there, although he had to ask one more question. One of the most basic questions he asked villains. Criminals, victims, witnesses, heroes, and even officers. Is there anything you aren't telling us? Unlike the previous question, Izuku did not answer right away. Naomasa watched as Izuku looked at him straight in the eyes. He suddenly felt as if he was being judged, as if those eyes were taking a look at how he was and deciding whether or not they would even answer him. It felt important. The teen surprisingly admitted to him, his words ringing true. But it isn't anything that would hurt other people. I just don't know if I should tell you. Izuku turned to look at Aizawa. You trust him, right? He asked the underground hero. Unknown to Naomasa, Izuku asked that question because he needed to know if he could trust the detective. All Might's judgment had already hurt Izuku before, so there wasn't much reassurance he got from the trust that the number one hero placed in the man as before. But for Izuku, Aizawa hadn't hurt Izuku like All Might and so many others did. For Izuku, the underground hero cared, he asked. So Izuku asked the man if they trusted the detective. Naomasa thought about All Might, who had said that the boy knew he knew about the quirk. Yet there Izuku was asking Eraserhead if they trusted him. It was something that was important, that had implications he didn't like. It was something that made Naomasa feel disappointed in Yagi. Yes, Izuku, I trust him. Truth, his quirk registered, and Naomasa couldn't help but feel a little pleased that the underground hero trusted him. He watched as some tension left Izuku's body as he seemed to sink deeper into the bed and pillows he was resting against. When Izuku looked at him, Naomasa saw tired eyes that still felt like they were looking deep inside of him. Then I might tell you, but just not right now. Okay? Izuku said almost hesitantly at the last bit. That was good enough for Naomasa. Yes, that's completely fine. As of now, this questioning is over. I'll probably have to ask more later on, but don't worry about that. In the meantime, just rest and feel better, he said as he was getting up from his seat and gathering his things to leave. When he opened the door to leave, he paused and turned back one more time to look at Izuku. I'm happy to see you back, Izuku, and I'm glad that they took care of you while you were gone. Then he turned back and let the door close behind him. Despite his lack of understanding, Naomasa couldn't deny what the League had done for the kid. Not a minute later, Aizawa walked out of the room and came up to him. Naomasa didn't waste any time checking up on the men. So how you feeling, huh? Aizawa let out a deep breath. Better. We should probably go talk to Nedzu, he suggested, knowing that Aizawa would most likely dislike it. He let himself smile when Aizawa sighed again, looking a little more tired than he was just a moment ago. Yeah, let's go see the rat. Izuku let out a deep breath once he was left alone. He was tired after answering those questions and going through the medical testing. It left him tense and wanting to have Magna massage his hands since she seemed the best at it. There was a lot Izuku kept to himself, things he didn't want to tell them yet. I can't tell them yet, he thought. He didn't know how they would react. Izuku didn't know if it was okay to tell them yet. It felt odd being back. But Izuku knew that he had to go. That the reason the League took him back was that they cared and knew they wouldn't be able to properly help him. Izuku knew that, he knew that very well. But still, he was a little scared. You did good, kid, a whisper sounding like banjo said in his head, and with it came warmth and reassurance. Aizawa-sensei was nice and present. Mike was too, Izuku remembered. Aizawa-sensei had said he trusted Tsukachi-san. Although, there was still the worry about how the detective was connected to All Might. The worry that the man would tell All Might he was back and have been with the villains, with Tamura. Izuku was worried that All Might would know that they were All for One, the man that had been after his quirk for so long. But All Might thought All for One was dead, right? All Might told him that the man was dead, but All Might told Izuku a lot of things and not all of them were true. Did he give him a quirk while a villain was still alive to come after it? Izuku took a deep breath to stop the swirling panic that building up inside his mind at his line of thought. He didn't want to give in to that panic yet, that swirling storm threatening to take over. No, he'd keep that back just a little while longer. If Aizawa-sensei said he trusted him, then maybe Tsukachi-san wouldn't go tell All Might. With that hope and panic held back just for a bit longer, Izuku let himself sink deeper into the soft pillows. He didn't want to worry anymore, he just wanted to sleep. That's all he ever felt like doing anymore, but even that didn't come easy. He wondered about all the secrets he had, the things he couldn't tell. All Izuku wanted to do was set them free. To let them go and let the wind take them away. Nedzu, of course, let Tsukachi and Aizawa inside his office right away once they had appeared at his door. Once seated, Aizawa told the principal about Izuku's condition. Nedzu's hand twitched slightly when he listened to Aizawa's summarization of the abuse the boy had suffered before he had even come to UA. It seemed that the story of those notebooks he had read was only a peek into what had happened. Nedzu nodded at his employee before turning his attention to the detective. How was the questioning? He's not a traitor or a villain if that's what you're worried about, Tsukachi said. The kidnapping took place at the store like the footage showed, but after that, it seemed we don't have to worry about the typical hostage type of situation. Izuku truthfully said that they took care of him. They fed, clothed him, helped him with his injuries, and even got him those gloves he has now. He even said that they hadn't asked him for information. And you believe him? Nedzu asked. Tsukachi nodded. I do. Even without my quirk, he didn't show any sign of lying. Although I know he withheld information with careful wording that I'm sure you would have found amusing. Nedzu's ear twitched and Tsukachi continued. But even that he didn't try to hide. He willingly admitted that there were things he wasn't telling us, but that it wasn't going to hurt anyone and he was unsure if he could tell me. He asked Aizawa if he trusted me. When Nedzu looked at Aizawa, the man nodded at him and Nedzu sighed. It seems we have to rebuild the trust that had been broken in our student. Which I promise I do intend to do. I will not let another student suffer the way he did. Now, Tsukachi, I am aware of your relationship with All Might, but I do ask that you keep this information to yourself. Yagi-san had made several poor decisions in regards to Izuku that led to him being in the state he was in when kidnapped. Even now the man is not allowed near students alone and is only still employed here due to the Hero Commission intervening. At the principal's words, the detective seemed to slump in his seat in disappointment. Tsukachi's thoughts about what Yagi had done popped back into his mind. He'd need to have a talk about what just has Yagi done with his successor, of course keeping Izuku's privacy in mind. Don't worry, Nedzu. I'll make sure to keep any information to myself, seeing as Yagi does not need to be involved in my investigation. Tsukachi didn't know how Aizawa could refrain from looking calm in the face of Nedzu's smile. Yes, thank you, detective, Nedzu said, taking glee in the man's unease. I'm glad we are in agreement. Now we at the school will do our best to help our student and give him the chance to share any information if he wishes to, which I hope he feels comfortable enough to do later on. I know how you humans seem to be in pain with too many secrets and things bottled up inside, as you would say. A very interesting characteristic indeed. Aizawa and Tsukachi shared a look as Nedzu seemed to delve into his thoughts until the underground hero cleared his throat. Luckily, it only took one time to get the principal's attention back on track instead of the peculiarities of being a human. I may have some more information, Aizawa said, taking out his phone. I saved the number from when the league texted me, and it seems they left a voicemail while I was with Izuku in the infirmary, which was why I didn't pick up. Have you listened to it yet? Aizawa shook his head. I was waiting for this meeting. Nedzu leaned forward in his seat. Well, we are all listening, so please play the message. The first sound from the voicemail was the sound of a scuffle and shouting, but one that would be normal to hear in a household of children rather than villains. It was odd to hear, but villains calling and leaving a voicemail for a hero was strange enough already. Eventually, it seemed that the person who had the phone could finally speak. Hey Racerhead, there's some more things you should know about taking care of Izuku, a voice said that Aizawa supplied, belonging to the person who introduced themselves as Magna when handing Izuku over. The voice continued. I know that it coming from us might be debatable, but this is what we know. It's not nice though. That unsettling feeling in Aizawa's gut seemed more present than ever. Magna sighed. Izuku is one depressed, anxious kid. He freezes up if you touch his shoulder. He doesn't sleep or sometimes sleeps too much. He sometimes disappears into his own mind and doesn't come back for a while. And when he does, he's quiet. He can be so quiet. Aizawa thought about the week that Izuku had been in school before the exam. A silent presence in class. He thought about how quiet he had been since coming back. There doesn't seem to be many adults he trusts, Magna continued. But he does like you, he likes you, Eraserhead. Both Tsukachi and Netsu seemed amused at that tidbit of information. He talked about you, said that you seemed to care and that you were better than the others. From the sound of it, Izuku wants to trust you, so please don't ruin that chance. That little amount of trust he has in you already. And here's the most serious thing you have to know. At the grave tone that Magna's voice had, all three individuals straightened up in their seats, waiting for whatever Magna was about to tell them. But even then, they weren't prepared to hear it. Izuku is suicidal. The words felt like a punch to Aizawa's gut, and he barely paid attention to the words that came afterward. He already had the message saved, and he was sure that Netsu was listening to every single word. When Aizawa finally looked up away from his now silent phone and to Netsu, the rat sighed. I cannot say I am surprised, the principal said. The treatment he has been through along with the depression is highly correlated with suicide, and from the short description this Magna gave, they are not wrong coming to that conclusion. I think we now have the reason as to why the League returned Izuku into our care. They knew a suicidal kid isn't something they can properly help with, Tsukachi said. Exactly. And though this is worrying, I do believe we can help. I am already in contact with multiple mental health officials due to the restaffing I did while Izuku was gone, and I believe I have the right person to help Izuku. That information seemed to reassure Aizawa and Tsukachi. But even when they left Netsu's office, there was visible tension in the two men. Tsukachi didn't see the point in asking Aizawa how he was doing, knowing the answer he would get would ding as a lie. Instead, he gave him a nod which the hero returned before they walked their separate ways. While Aizawa might have been feeling worried and concerned for his student, Tsukachi felt anger toward Yagi. He wondered why the man never brought up his successor's struggles whenever they were the topic of conversation. Yagi had never showed any sort of worry about something like that, he barely even asked for advice. Yagi made himself out to look as if he was perfectly fine mentoring Izuku. Even when Tsukachi had pointed out how there could be trouble the boy might be dealing with from being quirkless, Yagi had reassured him it was being dealt with. Because Yagi himself apparently believed that it was labeled truth by his quirk. Tsukachi had made the mistake of believing him. Of believing in the number one hero, someone who used to be quirkless and should understand. The man had a lot on his shoulders and made the decision to pass down the power. He decided to take up the responsibility of mentoring someone. Yet, there was evidence that Yagi had not fulfilled his responsibility. There was evidence that villains were more aware of the mental state of Izuku than the kid's own mentor. Yagi, just what did you do? Izuku was woken up by a nurse who introduced herself as Nurse Iwasaki when they came to check up on him. Izuku noticed how she didn't wake him up by tapping a cane on the bed frame. He had to say, he liked Nurse Iwasaki's method more. She was polite like Dr. Tanaka and gentle too. Izuku remembered how Aizawa-sensei said that the principal hired new people which, from the looks of it, was medical staff that knew how to interact with teenagers. Nurse Iwasaki had been gentle but also didn't make him feel like a baby that didn't know any better. Recovery Girl didn't have the same bedside manner, probably from healing more experienced, tougher pro heroes than teenagers. Izuku thought that occasionally being treated like a child could be good for pro heroes, especially if one was being an idiot, but as a hero student in training who was bound to make mistakes, it didn't fit right. Not that he really told anyone that. He wondered if anyone in his class might have shared his opinion. Reminded of his classmates, he looked at the necklace two of them helped make. Izuku held it up in front of him, the marble catching the light coming in from the window. He wondered what the others were doing at the bar. Alone with the countless number of things he could be worrying about, Izuku started feeling twitchy. Izuku had gotten so used to the sounds that came from the bar that was rarely quiet. which was why when someone arrived he mentally thanked whoever they were. He was surprised to see that it was present Mike who he was mentally thanking. He couldn't help but stare a bit at the man's hair considering it was neatly flowing down instead of reaching towards the ceiling like in class. The difference reminded Izuku of Kirishima's hair and how he would gel it up for school, but once sent a photo of him with his mom's that showed it down. It's pretty, Izuku thought, and he could imagine that there would be no trouble in doing nice braids in present Mick's hair. If the man took any notice of Izuku's staring, he didn't seem to mind. "Hey kiddo, it's nice to see you again. I missed having you in class. No one seemed to get my jokes other than Kaminari while you were gone." Izuku noticed that present Mike spoke casually. He appreciated how he and Aizawa-sensei didn't make a big deal about him being back. Also how present Mike didn't seem bothered when Izuku kept quiet either. Instead, the man plopped down in the chair beside his bed before speaking again. "I have a snack for you, approved by Nurse Iwasaki too, so no worries." Present Mike pulled out a small plastic-wrapped package and placed it on the bed beside him while taking out another for himself. "This is one of the things your homeroom teacher is always eating when he gets inside his sleeping bag. Let me know if you like it and I can bring you more." When present Mike opened their own jelly packet, because Izuku knew it was a jelly packet that Aizawa-sensei would be eating, he turned his attention to the packet on his bed. When he picked it up, he saw that it was apple-flavored. The flavor was really nice when Izuku finally tried it. "Do you like it?" present Mike asked. Izuku nodded in response, which made the man laugh. He'll never bring himself to admit it, but Aizawa actually doesn't like this flavor, so he always has a bunch when he buys the mixed boxes. But I guess that problem is solved. With you and me, I think we'll make sure none of these go to waste, right? Izuku smiled at the snippet of information his teacher revealed. After taking one more sip, he went to open his mouth and thank the man for the treat. But as he tried to get the words out, Izuku found that nothing came out. When he tried again, still nothing came out. With words that seemed to be stuck in his throat, the swirling storm of panic inside Izuku found a weakness in the wall he had, and it pushed. It only made his throat feel constricted, which made the words even more difficult to come out. And that fed the growing panic. Izuku tried to clear his throat and hold back the tears that were threatening to come up. But as he tried to do that, thoughts that were unkind came up once again. Old insults from middle school rang in his mind, along with the new one of how he was so useless he couldn't speak, couldn't say something as simple as thank you. Stupid. Useless. Can't even speak now? F-I-N-G pathetic. He's going to think you're ungrateful and stupid, just like everyone else. The idiot. How hard is it to talk? Just how more useless can you be? A small solid tap on his leg cut through Izuku's thoughts, and he dropped the jelly packet he had been squeezing onto the covers in surprise. He looked up to see present Mike looking at him calmly, his hands still resting on the top of his lower leg on the top of the cover. The contact was grounding. "It's okay if you can't talk right now, don't force yourself," present Mike said. "You're going to hurt your throat like that. So just take a few breaths, alright?" Izuku watched as present Mike made a show of taking a few breaths, which he tried to copy, and as he did that, he noticed how his throat was hurting from the repeated rough throat clearing he had been doing. He also noticed that his cheeks were wet again. Wiping his cheeks, he kept breathing until the tension that he had slowly went away and he didn't feel like crying anymore. Present Mike seemed to notice and poured him a cup of water from the water pitcher that was on the side table. It was only after he saw Izuku take several gulps of water that the man spoke. "I take it that you panicked when you weren't able to talk?" Izuku nodded. "That's all right. You've been through a lot, and sometimes when that happens you can go mute for a little bit. I know it can be frustrating though, there's been a few times where I've gone mute too." Izuku's eyes widened in surprise at the admission, which made the voice hero chuckle. "Yeah, a little odd considering my quirk when you first think about it. But I'm okay. I was able to use sign language when it happened and I still wanted to talk." "Do you know sign language?" Izuku shook his head. Izuku watches as a thoughtful look crossed over present Mick's face before he spoke. "Say, if you want I can teach you sign language. Other than my own PRDS of going mute, one of my parents is deaf. I don't know how long you're going to be mute, and I'll make sure to let the doctor or nurse know when they check up on you. But if you don't want to write on a notepad or just want to know, I can teach you." Once again, Izuku ended up staring at present Mike. He went over the words the man had said and how he had said it. He looked into his teacher's eyes that didn't seem to be hiding something or even looking at him in pity after seeing him panic about suddenly being mute. It was a genuine offer. When he nodded, he was rewarded with a big smile from the hero. All right. But first things first, present Mike jumped out of his seat and clapped his hands together. Let's get you out of the bed for a bit. Make sure you got some nice blood flow going on. I think it'll make you feel better unless you'd really rather not. Even though Izuku didn't feel like moving, he felt like he could just sink into the bed and do nothing. He looked at present Mike, back at the jelly packet, and at his hands. He could still feel that nervous energy building up again, and he wanted nothing more than to make it go away. So if getting some nice blood flow with his English teacher was going to help, he wasn't going to say no. After all, the man had only done nice things since coming into the room. Giving him a snack, telling him a funny piece of information, helping him panicking, and even offering to teach him sign language to help out. Izuku moved the covers off his legs and moved his legs to dangle off the edge of the bed for a bit. Then he pushed himself off, letting the chill of the floor wake him up just a bit more. He looked back at his teacher, who gave him a thumbs up. Nice. Now try not to laugh at me when we stretch and you hear something crack coming from me. I got some years on you. Izuku nodded before holding back a smile at the first crack that happened when present Mike bent down. Even though Izuku tried to hide it, present Mike had noticed that he had been smiling in amusement by the cracks that did come from him as they stretched. But when the man tried to act offended, Izuku had simply stretched in a way that made his back crack in several places. When he looked back, he saw that his teacher looked horrified. His laughter had been silent, but from the movement of his shoulders, present Mike was well aware he had found their face funny. Laugh it up, kid, but don't come crying to me when you sound like a glow stick. You already light up with your quirk, so really the sound would go well. Actually, you should go with Mount Lady when she goes to a rave and needs a glow stick. That could be your side gig after you graduate. I might even hire you for the crowd at a concert I may host. How does that sound? Present Mike asked, somehow managing to sound completely sincere throughout the whole thing. Izuku's shoulders didn't stop moving for a few extra seconds. When they did, present Mike smiled. All right, I think that's enough stretching, and I don't want Nurse Iwasaki to come in just to see you on the floor, or worse, Dr. Tanaka. Those two are not to be messed with, the man said while making it a show as he got up, even though Izuku knew he could move more gracefully than that. Izuku followed suit and made his way back onto the bed. He was still tired, but the stretching had helped dispel that anxious energy. His fingers didn't feel twitchy. As he settled onto the bed, he thought for a moment that present Mike would leave, but the man simply sat back into his chair. So do you want me to start to show you the alphabet for JSL? The hero laughed at how quickly Izuku nodded yes. Izuku spent a good amount of time with the voice hero copying the finger positions. Present Mike seemed to enjoy teaching him even when Izuku messed up a few times, and he didn't seem bothered when Izuku took a break to massage his hands. He didn't know how his hands would take the new movements, but he wanted to make sure it wouldn't hurt later on. Eventually, though, their time together came to an end. But before present Mike left, Izuku did the sing for thank you and tried to fingerspell present Mike, but he was interrupted before he could finish. Call me Yamada, his teacher said. Izuku paused and looked at the man before smiling slightly and repeating the sign for thank you before fingerspelling Yamada. When he finished, Yamada-sensei had a big smile on his face. He seemed to smile a lot. Izuku thought it was nice. Then, as Yamada-sensei said, "You're welcome, I had fun spending time with you," he signed it out too. It made Izuku look forward to learning how to do that. Izuku hadn't realized he had fallen asleep until Nurse Iwasaki woke him again, letting him know Aizawa-sensei was coming and that she would be giving him something to eat too. Right after the nurse left, in walked Aizawa-sensei. Shoyuda had been worried after Hizashi told him his student was mute. But after having his own husband point out logic and being calm themselves, he felt better. Not that he'd admit it. Zashi probably already knew what effect he had on him. So instead he asked the nurse how his student was, and she had reported that he was asleep again. Later is when he decided to visit the kid again. To have him spend some time awake enough to eat something and also show him that he's not going to be left alone. Nurse Iwasaki went in first to wake him up and then let him inside. Going inside, Shoyuta was met with the sight of his student with messy hair and the red marks that happen when your face lays on something for too long. He refrained from chuckling and decided to go with a simple greeting. Figured. Zashi let me know he visited earlier. Hope that he didn't scare you about us being your guardians, he just gets excited sometimes. Because of that, I am required to tell you that he was happy to hang out with you earlier today and is very happy to have someone to show JSL to, even though I'm sure he already told you this before, he said, making himself sound much more relaxed than he was. Shoyuta would be a liar if he didn't say he wasn't just a bit worried about what Izuku thought about his husband. So when he saw the small smile that Izuku showed, he felt relieved. Looks like the two both enjoyed the visit. As he took a seat, Shoyuta kept talking. I know JSL too, not only because marriage requires you to talk to your spouse but also because of my underground work. There have been a lot of cases where I needed to use it in the field. He saw how Izuku perked up that information and remembered how interested his student was whenever he talked about underground hero work in class. He wondered if that was the type of hero they had wanted to be. With Izuku's interest caught, Shoyuta explained a bit about some cases where he had to use it, and he even showed him a few signs he regularly used. If someone were to come in, they would have thought a teacher was lecturing their injured student class material. But in reality, Shoyuta didn't have as much practice talking to kids Izuku's age outside of the classroom as Hizashi did. Although, Izuku didn't seem bothered by the topic. Nurse Iwasaki was the one to cut into the demonstration with two packages. She first gave one to Izuku and the other to Shoyuta. When he gave her a questionable look, she responded with, Dr. Tanaka said to give this to you and wanted me to remind you to set a good example to young impressionable students. With that, she walked away. It's a snort that draws Shuta's attention back to Izuku, who suddenly was very interested in their own food. Not dignifying that with a response, Shoyuta opened his package and began to eat his food. He knew Dr. Tanaka would check later and he'd rather not deal with her scolding him. As the two of them ate, Shoyuta saw the jelly packet on Izuku's bed. He saw that it was the flavor he didn't like. No doubt Hizashi told his student about it. He leaned over and picked up the eaten packet, drawing Izuku's attention. You have questionable taste, Shoyuta said. Izuku shrugged in response while eating. Shoyuta stayed even after they had finished eating. The two of them seemed comfortable in the silence, and Shoyuta managed to go through several papers he had brought with him. Eventually, though it was time that Hizashi's shift at the radio station started he took out his phone and opened up the app that let him listen to the radio. It was already set to hands-up radio. Izuku's head had turned quirky towards him when Hizashi's voice came out of the speaker. Want me to turn it off? Shoyuta asked. When Izuku strongly shook his head no, he didn't hold back his chuckle. Zashi has a fan. Shoyuta stayed going over papers, listening to his husband's radio station even after his student fell asleep again. When Izuku woke up the next morning and turned his face, he saw that Aizawa-sensei was there in the same seat as the day before. You sleep like the dead, the man said. Izuku snorted. He was reminded of Dabi saying that he looked like he'd drop dead. Izuku knew his appearance was less than ideal. But having a weird sleeping schedule and too much going on in his head was not conducive to having good looks. A few minutes after he woke up, Nurse Iwasaki came in again to check up on him. Then after he had used the bathroom and came back, there was a package of food waiting for him. He didn't fail to notice that Aizawa-sensei also had one too. This time there was a sticky note saying eat, but it had yet to be opened. Settling back on the bed with his legs folded underneath him, Izuku opened his own package but stared at Aizawa-sensei, who was still looking at papers. After a minute, the man sighed and put the papers down before grabbing the package and opening it. When he looked up, Izuku only gestured for him to take a bite. There was a huff of amusement before the man took his first bite. Happy now? Aizawa-sensei asked after he swallowed, and Izuku nodded. Now you eat, or else Dr. Tanaka will start leaving sticky notes for you too. Only when Izuku started to eat too did Aizawa-sensei finally take another bite. Eventually, Aizawa-sensei did leave, and when he did, Izuku was urged to do stretches again by Nurse Iwasaki. He didn't dare say no, seeing how she was very adamant about it. Also, he didn't mind doing the stretches. Later on, he ate lunch and Nurse Iwasaki came back with his clothes that they had washed for him. She said that he could change into them, seeing as he would probably be ready to leave the infirmary later that day if he wanted. It was comforting to put back on the blue hoodie. He spent a good amount of fiddling with the marble necklace. He could feel the necklace resting against his neck, and Izuku thought about seeing if maybe he'd be able to talk a little bit. At first, he just began by trying to hum, which was quiet at first until it increased in volume. It was nice to see that he could make the sound. After humming, it was smaller sounds. It felt a little childish to be making little sounds and feeling giddy at being able to do it, but he pushed those negative thoughts to the side. No one was in the room with him, and he'll do as he please. Eventually, he built up the courage to see if he could speak. At the whispered, "Hello," he managed to do. He sighed in relief. There had been times in the past where Izuku found it hard to talk or simply just didn't want to talk at all, but never had he gone completely mute like the day before. It had been scary at first when nothing came out, but Yamada-sensei had helped. It made him feel better knowing that they had gone through something like that too. He didn't know Yamada-sensei that well. Other than at USJ, the festival, and in some classes he hadn't really heard or interacted with him much. It was nice to see though that they didn't mind spending time with him, even going as far as to make Aizawa-sensei tell him that. It was much later when someone else visited and Izuku got to see that it was his principal along with Aizawa-sensei. "Good afternoon, Izuku," the principal chirped. "Hello, Principal Nedzu," Izuku said, making sure to sit up straighter. He hadn't a lot of experience interacting with the principal and didn't want to give any reason. "You may simply call me Nedzu. I know that you told the detective you prefer your first name, and it would be odd if you kept calling me principal. I'm not as faithful to those rules that humans come up with." "You're not?" Izuku couldn't help but ask. He saw one of Nedzu's ears flick with interest. "Yes, I may be able to talk about it later on with you, but the focus of this meeting is on you instead. More specifically about what we at UA can do to help with your mental health, as I'm sure you are aware of it being less than ideal." Izuku snorted at the way they put it. "As you are well aware, I've done some restaffing, and that also included getting more staff like Hound Dog for counseling and therapy. They aren't officially affiliated with UA and instead are board certified to work in the mental health field, so you don't have to be concerned about their qualifications," Nedzu said. "We got a message from the league letting us know about their concerns, and we think it would be beneficial for you to start therapy." Even though he knew it was coming, Izuku couldn't help the different emotions that came up at those words. He felt touched that the league let the school know their concerns. Never would he have imagined a bunch of villains talking to a hero school about the mental health of one of their students they had kidnapped. It was funny. Nedzu had sounded sincere, everyone had sounded sincere since he had come back. It was a little odd but nice. Izuku knew about therapy, he'd done his research. He remembers on Quirkless forums people talking about how they managed to find a therapist to talk to and it went well. But he also read about appointments that were less than helpful and left them worse than before. It was a mixed bag. He didn't doubt that Nedzu chose someone who wasn't discriminatory. That didn't make the fear go away though. Then there was the anxiety about talking to someone, to really talk. It had taken days for him to open up a little bit to the league, and even then, he hadn't gone into depth about what he had experienced. It was different with the league, but still he didn't tell them everything. He held things back, not wanting to risk revealing it. So the league knew some things, but here, other than what the doctor recorded, they knew even less. He had yet to tell them. They were nice now, but what if that changed afterward? But it was good to talk to a professional. It was their job to discuss it, to help you cope with it. Izuku knew that. He knew that it could go completely fine. Except that meant talking about it. Talking about his mom in middle school. Talking about how his mom looked at him. Talking about how his past classmates treated him. It meant talking about heat and pain, that ache in his chest, that dragging weight. There's so much to talk about. There are things he might not even be able to talk about. What if they get mad? What if they think he's lying like his past teachers? What if they say it was okay that he was treated that way? Lift. What if? Countless possibilities ran through Izuku's head as the anxiety grew, as that panic seemed to take over. He let himself slouch down and bring his legs to his chest. Everything felt tense, and he started to remember things he wished he could forget sometimes. It felt difficult to move his mouth, and Izuku felt the heat of anger at how he was reacting to something helpful his principal and teachers were trying to do. Then slowly everything started to blend together until he wasn't able to make out the lights and colors in the infirmary room. Nedzu found it rather unpleasant to witness his student going into his own mind, as Magna has said in the voicemail. When he looked at Aizawa, he saw that the man shared his feelings. They tried to call his name, but the boy kept looking forward, his previously tense body now lax in the curled-up position he had taken. "I believe I will call her now," Nedzu said, referencing to one of the contacts he had been talking to Izuku about. "Is she the best for his situation?" Nedzu smiled at Aizawa's question. He always enjoyed how the man didn't seem so hesitant to ask questions, unlike some other human he knew. "Yes, I think she is the most fitting, especially with the muteness that Izuku exhibited yesterday." Aizawa nodded and took a seat while Nedzu headed out to make a phone call. Izuku thought the swirls of gray were nice to see again, along with the familiar sensation of sitting on the ground, which he had taken to doing more whenever he was in the gray place. Although the feeling of someone sitting next to him was new. When he turned, he saw one of the past holders that had yet to speak. They had hair that reminded him of Tamura's. Short, light, and a little messy with how it covered a part of their face. Izuku could see one green eye that wasn't covered by hair. When that green-eyed looked down at him, cause of course they were taller, the man smiled. Then slowly, they brought a hand up and cupped his head. Gently they pulled his head to lean against their arm. Izuku let him because he felt safe sitting there, and he was never one to refuse comfort. It was odd how much comfort the past holders gave him. Although, he didn't forget the pain they caused him when talking about All for One. They had apologized, but it still hurt, and he hoped they wouldn't do something like that again. He really hoped he could find some solace in them like he did with the League. So this past holder, that he yet to even learn the name of, letting him lean on them was nice. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, and they stayed there for a while. Izuku didn't know how long it had been when the silence was broken. "A lot's changing, isn't it?" the man asked. Izuku hummed in agreement. "Feels like too much," he said quietly, almost a whisper, but it was no issue for the past holder to hear. "I know," they said. "It seems like good change, but I do hope you take it slow. You're on the edge, Izuku." Izuku thought the description was very accurate. He was looking down at darkness, threatening to reach up and drag him down or welcome him into its arms if he were to fall. Falling has looked more appealing over the years. "Excuse me," a voice said. A voice Izuku was unfamiliar with hearing in the gray place. Suddenly Izuku saw the past holder, Sora, walk up beside him with their head titled. It looked like they heard the voice too. Sora turned their head and looked down at where Izuku was still seated, leaning against the other past holder. "Well, that wasn't one of us," they said. He started to have the inkling that there was someone new in his room where Aizawa-sensei and Nedzu had been in. He lifted his head off of the arm of the mysterious past holder, who simply smiled at him. "Goodbye, Izuku." With that, the gray seemed to fade away, replaced by the whites and colors that he had grown to connect to the infirmary room he was in. As things became clearer, he saw that he had been right. There was someone new in the room while the others were gone. It was a woman. She was sitting in a seat closer to the foot of the bed to the side. Not too close, but not too far. She looked strong was one of the first things Izuku noticed. Along with long hair that was a dark teal green and her eyes that were gold. It reminded him of photos of tropical reefs he saw. She seemed to be Aizawa-sensei's height, but he couldn't really tell with how she was sitting down. As Izuku took in more details, he knew that she had seen him. But she had yet to say anything. It was as if she were letting him evaluate her, but eventually she spoke. "Hello," she said, and Izuku found that she had a nice voice. "My name is Ishiyuma. I'm a licensed psychotherapist that your principal asked to come. They told me that they talked a little bit about therapy before you seemed to dissociate. I came in since my quirk allows me to communicate telepathically, and I could bring you out of that state when the other methods weren't working. You might have heard my voice in your head a few moments ago." Izuku nodded. She smiled. "That's good that you remember. Are you able to communicate verbally right now?" He shook his head. "That's okay. The others are outside right now to give you some privacy. Would you like to have them come in?" Izuku looked at the door and imagined Aizawa-sensei and Nedzu waiting outside. He didn't like that he dissociated in front of them. He shook his head no. Then I guess they will have to wait, Ishii-san said in a way that made Izuku feel less guilty about it. She had made it sound like they were sharing a joke together. The room returned to silence. Izuku saw how Ishii-san looked completely at ease with him. He appreciated it, how she was giving him a reprieve even though it was her job to have him talk, at least that's what he thought. With the silence, Izuku thought back to what Nedzu had been talking to him before. He looked back at Ishii-san and how she was with him right now. She seemed nice. Maybe he'd be able to do it. Izuku wanted to tell her what he thought. His answer to Nedzu's offer, but like before he couldn't. He couldn't really get his mouth to open without feeling a spike in anxiety. Izuku frowned and clenched his jaw in frustration. Would you like me to use my quirk? Izuku looked up at Ishii-san who continued. With permission, I can let the telepathic communication be a two-way street instead of you just being able to hear my voice. His eyes widened in fascination and he nodded at experiencing that type of quirk. Ishii-san looked amused by his reaction before taking a concentrated look on her face. Suddenly Izuku felt a gentle brushing sensation around his head as if something was asking for permission to enter. It felt odd, giving permission, but then he heard her voice again. Hello, she said without opening her mouth. At those words, Izuku's mind came up with different details of telepathic-related mind quirks he knew but refrained from sending all that information to the woman. Although considering the smile she had, he may have failed at it. But he had yet to respond to her mentally. It was weird to seemingly create a voice in his head mentally, but he imagined sending the words to her. Or rather word. Hi. He saw her nod at him in acknowledgement from her seat and took in a deep breath at the realization that she did hear him. It was odd, while it was a little easier to speak through her quirk, he still didn't exactly want to speak. But he did want to tell her his decision so she could let the others know. And with 4 words he told her that therapy's okay with me. When he sent those words he tensed up in preparation for how she would react. All right, she said. Would you like me to tell your principal and teacher you're okay with doing therapy with me? Izuku nodded at her question for clarification. Then it sounds like we have plan, Ishii-san said out loud. The details can be hashed out later since that can take some time and I don't want to overwhelm you. Sound good? He nodded, appreciating how he wouldn't have to figure that all out right then and there. He was tired and wanted to leave the infirmary already. At his response, Ishii-san had stood up, which Izuku copied. He took a moment to put on his shoes and turned to look at her and saw that she was much taller than Aizawa-sensei. She had a sort of impressive presence that Izuku thought fit her. Seemingly understanding that he was ready to leave, she didn't say anything as they walked to the door. When she opened it, Izuku saw that both Nedzu and Aizawa-sensei were waiting outside. The two of them looked at Ishii-san before looking at him. How did it go? Aizawa-sensei asked. Ishii-san smiled at the man that was indeed a few inches shorter than her. I will be letting you know which days I can come for our appointments. At her response, Aizawa-sensei gave Izuku a questioning look and he responded with a small nod that seemed to placate the man. That can be arranged, Ishii-san. Thank you for coming, Nedzu chirped. Ishii-san gave him a smile in return before turning to Izuku, who heard, I look forward to our next meeting, in his head. Izuku tried to give her a grateful smile when he responded. Thank you. With that, Ishii-san gave a short nod before saying goodbye to the two adults and leaving. Izuku could feel the connection with the woman fade as she walked further away until it was completely gone. Once it was the 3 of them alone again, Nedzu turned his attention to Izuku. Well, are you ready to see where you'll be partially staying with Aizawa and Yamada other than the dorms? He asked. Izuku looked at his teacher and thought about the things he had done for him since coming back. Along with what Yamada-sensei did for him too. It was easy to nod yes. Izuku was relieved that Aizawa-sensei didn't try to carry him like he had carried him to the infirmary. He admitted that it had been nice, but now with a clearer mind, Izuku thought he'd die of embarrassment. Just how many times he was going to embarrass himself in front of teachers, he didn't know. If anything, he wanted to walk, to do something with the nervous energy that lingered. Usually, he would mumble or ramble, but there was no desire to talk. And he couldn't if he tried. His tongue felt heavy, and the thought of even opening his mouth to let a word slip out didn't help with the anxiety that grew like a weed in his mind. But it didn't look like Aizawa-sensei was bothered by his silence, which helped him feel less guilty. It was a little bit before they got to the building where his teacher lived that the man spoke. "If you don't like Ishii-san, we can get you another therapist. Nedzu has a lot of connections and it wouldn't be difficult." Izuku looked at the man, and when Aizawa-sensei caught his eye, he seemed to falter for a moment. "That just let us know, all right?" When Izuku heard Aizawa-sensei's tone at the end, he realized something. Aizawa-sensei seemed unsure. Izuku didn't blame the man or his principal for what happened earlier. Izuku had pushed himself, so the dissociation didn't exactly surprise him. It just looked like something else he'd have to be careful with, along with the selective mutism he was now dealing with. Izuku kept looking back at his teacher, who looked slightly uncomfortable, and he felt reassured somewhat. "I have people on my side." Izuku finally relieved his teacher of their discomfort when he nodded. With that, they finally reached the building and headed up. The first thing that happened when they opened the door and walked in, Aizawa-sensei leading the way, was a cat suddenly among his teacher's feet. He saw the man slightly trip up in an attempt to not step on the cat. "Inky," he heard the man mutter, and Izuku noted that as probably the way the cat got his name. Once there was no longer a tripping hazard, Aizawa-sensei began a less than descriptive tour. It didn't surprise Izuku, as he was used to the quick and straightforward description from the training in class. With the same method, Izuku was shown the living, dining room, and kitchen, along with the bathroom and where his teacher's room was. Then they reached the guest room where Izuku would be staying in. When Aizawa-sensei opened it, he stood to the side to let Izuku get a better look. It was a regular room. A desk, dresser, closet, nightstand, and a bed. Undecorated and the typical image of a guest room with no personal touches. It was nice. Izuku looked back at Aizawa-sensei, who once again seemed unsure, although anyone who wasn't used to watching for small details wouldn't have been able to tell at all. It was odd to see, but clearly, the man was slightly out of his depth or unused to the new relationship they would now have. Izuku couldn't help but be a little amused that one of the things he shared with his teacher was being just a tad awkward with people. "This is going to be your room," Aizawa said. "We can get your stuff and you can put it in here and get settled. As for decorations, I'm sure it won't be an issue to choose a day and get things that you like. I'm warning you though, Hizashi will want to go and will push you to get anything he thinks you like." Izuku thought that sounded fine and nodded. With that, Aizawa gestured for him to follow them. As Izuku followed him, he heard the man muttering something that sounded like, "Namuri is going to have a field day with this when she finds out." Before he could hear any more, Aizawa was showing him where his duffel bag was by the couch. "We haven't messed with if you're worried about that," Aizawa said once Izuku had been standing there, simply staring at the bag for a bit. Izuku shook his head and bent down to grab it. He looked at the bag now in hand and at his teacher. Then he gestured his head down in the direction of his new room. Aizawa seemed more comfortable when he nodded his head. "Go and unpack, kid. Zashi should be coming with dinner later, I bet." With that, Izuku was off. Hoping to relieve his teacher of the awkwardness the man no doubt was still feeling and to give himself a moment with the bag of things the League had prepared for him. On the floor, Izuku sat in front of his bag just staring at it for a few minutes. He felt just a bit sad at the thought of the League packing it up for him, as he had been laying down on the couch stuck in his own mind. It must have been hard for them to see him like that. Taking a deep breath, Izuku opened the bag and smiled at how neatly everything was. No doubt Seiko and Kurojiri were the ones responsible for that. One top was his notebook and a jacket which he easily put off to the side. When he turned back to his bag to take out another thing, there was something furry sitting on top of it. BSRD looked at him. Izuku looked back at BSRD. Neither of them looked away. Izuku tilted his head and blinked slowly. After a few moments, he got a slow blink in return. It was the sound of someone clearing their throat that drew Izuku's attention away from the cat. He turned and saw Aizawa-sensei looking at him from his spot, leaning against the doorway with his arms crossed. "You can move him if you need to. Though, he'll probably try to get back in the spot again." Izuku turned back to Batad before reaching out and lifting him. Like a wet noodle, the cat seemed to be limp in his arms, staring at him as Izuku set him to the side. But when Izuku went back to his bag, there was another cat. This time it was an orange tabby, although it wasn't sitting on his bag, just in front of him. And that's Kimchi. His teacher's voice supplied the name of the new cat. Kimchi, luckily, didn't need to be moved from their spot in between Izuku and his bag. Kimchi didn't move as Izuku took out more items of clothing from the bag. Eventually, though, Izuku didn't pull out clothing. Instead, he felt the familiar weight of a knife. He quickly, but gently took it out and placed it on the floor, hoping that Aizawa-sensei hadn't seen it and that it was only one knife. He was very aware of his teacher's observational skills when he pulled out another knife. But when he went to place that knife beside the other, he found that there was a black paw on the knife. Izuku heard Aizawa-sensei sigh. And that spoon. At the odd name, Izuku looked up at the man. And his curiosity must have been clear on his face, and Aizawa looked amused for a movement. Not at all awkward when it came to his furry companions. There are logical reasons for their names, the underground hero said. BSTRD should be self-explanatory with how he's just a BSTRD. Now the thief who's eyeing your knife is Spoon. Don't be fooled by his missing eye and leg, it doesn't stop him from stealing. And I know what you're thinking, why the name Spoon? Izuku nodded. That's 'cause the Dmed thing is fascinated with spoons for some reason and goes after them constantly. I thought Zashi was throwing them away with how quickly our spoons went missing the first week we had Spoon at home. So watch yourself during meals because he will steal your spoon if given the chance. Izuku looked at the black Bombay cat named Spoon, who didn't look so interested in his knife and was now more interested with him. The one eye stared at him. That was until the orange tabby moved and pushed Spoon out of the way. Now her, Aizawa said, eyeing the orange tabby. She's fascinated by something too. Can you guess what? Izuku could hear the amusement in the man's voice and sent him a deadpan look. Aizawa-sensei smirked slightly. Good to see you're catching on. She likes kimchi and has escaped many times to go back to the Korean restaurant where I first found her eating kimchi. The owner always gives it to her whenever she comes by. So keep an eye on her if you leave a door or window open. Now with the knowledge about how his teacher named their cats, Izuku went back to taking out his things. At some point, Aizawa-sensei had left and come back by the time Izuku was finished taking out clothes. Although there were still things inside. Of course, that was when he pulled out another knife. Then another. And another. Izuku leaned forward to get a better look to see just how many knives were in the bag. There were a lot of knives. Izuku felt his cheeks flush when he took out the 15th knife that Himiko put there, because it had to have been her. And once again he was well aware that his teacher had seen them. Obviously, the man was probably interested in why Izuku had brought so many weapons brought into his home. Himiko, I swear you did this on purpose? Somewhere in a bar, hiding underneath a table for stealing several hoodies, Himiko smiled fondly at the knife in her hand, thinking of a certain green-eyed boy. It wasn't until Izuku got to number 24 that there were finally no more knives left in his bag. He looked back at his teacher and hated how they didn't say anything. That only made him feel more embarrassed. Luckily, the two of them soon heard the front door being opened and a familiar voice announcing that they brought food. Izuku looked at Aizawa-sensei and the man gestured to his head in the direction of the dining room. Time to eat. At that, Izuku rushed out of his room. And failed to see how Aizawa-sensei looked at the new collection of knives his students had with a small smile. Yamada-sensei almost seemed excited when setting down another plate for Izuku at the table. Izuku wondered if he just liked having people over. Izuku found it interesting seeing how easily and naturally the two men separated what they wanted from the takeout. Wordlessly handing each other different dishes and even placing things on each other's plates. Izuku ended up not having put anything on his own plate from getting caught up in watching their oddly soothing process. He blushed when Aizawa-sensei pointed it out and pushed a container of food toward him. He blushed even more when the man told Yamada-sensei about the number of knives he had, causing his English teacher to choke on their drink. The two of them resumed eating while the voice hero muttered, "Thank God Spoon isn't named Knife." It was a while after dinner when Yamada-sensei came to Izuku to let him know that he could take a shower. I know even staying in the infirmary for a while can make you stir crazy or just feel odd, so I thought I'd ask if you wanted you could take a shower. We don't have any rules about when you can or can't shower, so that's an option if you want, Yamada-sensei said. Izuku had quickly nodded yes and gathered what he needed before heading off to the bathroom. It wasn't hard to figure out the shower. This time it wasn't Himiko who had teased him before letting him go inside. Instead, it was Yamada-sensei. They let him know that he could just call out if he was having trouble, but it didn't feel bad. After a few seconds, Izuku managed to turn on the water and finally get in the shower. Eager to wash off his stay from the infirmary and just feel clean again. Eventually, Izuku found himself just standing there. Once again, letting the sound of the water rush over him. His hair clung to his forehead and the nape of his neck. The water seemingly thundering as he closed his eyes and simply listened. As he stood there alone, Izuku began taking deep breaths. At one point they became shaky breaths. Then he just let it all hit him. There was the sudden realization that so much had happened. That it was all so much, that it made him feel so many different ways. Slowly there was a clenching in his chest and that familiar sensation in his throat he got whenever he started to cry. The tears came out easily but were quickly washed away by the water. It was that thought that suddenly made Izuku laugh. That simple thought of his tears just being washed away by the water. The simplicity was funny to him considering the complicated position he was in. It wasn't exactly a happy laugh if a little bitter. It was more of disbelief. Disbelief that he was even there. Disbelief that he had spent weeks with the League and grew to really care for them. Disbelief that they had been willing to hand him over to a hero just for his health, even if it was a risk for them. Disbelief that the hero was his teacher and let him into his home, along with his husband who didn't have any issue with it. In fact, Yamada-sensei seemed more than happy to do so. And there he was, after eating dinner with the two and taking a shower back at UA where he was supposed to live life normally, no matter how unnormal it felt. So he laughed, bent down so he didn't choke on water. And his laughter was quiet enough that Izuku didn't think his two teachers would hear and possibly think he had gone crazy. Then with the laughter came a sense of relief? Izuku wasn't sure. It was just another emotion to add to the flurry of them inside him. Then there was a chirp. At the chirp, Izuku finally really looked around the shower and he found Spoon sitting in the corner, one eye staring at him. Spoon didn't seem bothered at all by the water. Izuku huffed in amusement and crouched down, tucking his knees under his chin and letting the water hit his back. Spoon kept staring at him and so did Izuku. It seemed that Izuku was going to end up in a staring match with all his teacher's cats. After a minute, Spoon finally reached closer to his face and Izuku let him. The sensation of a scratchy tongue on the tip of his nose made him smile. He got a chirp in response. Spoon stayed in the shower. Izuku wondered how many times Spoon had done this with his teacher. The idea of the cat doing that with pro heroes was amusing. What if Yamada-sensei sang in the shower? Was a question that made Izuku snort in amusement as Spoon titled his head at him. When he was finished, Izuku dried himself and got dressed while Spoon stayed in their place in the shower. Hanging the towel around his neck, Izuku looked at Spoon. "You're going to get cold if you stay there," he said quietly, the words coming easier albeit not as loud. Spoon simply tilted his head. Izuku stared at them before looking around the bathroom and seeing a towel with paw prints on it. He grabbed it, hoping that it was the unofficial towel for the cats. Spoon didn't move at all even as Izuku scooped them up into the towel, wrapping them up and holding them close to his chest. If anything, Spoon was pleased by the position and proceeded to lick the underside of Izuku's chin. Then Izuku opened the door and walked out and into someone. He found himself face to face, or face to chest considering how much taller the man was, with Aizawa-sensei. When Izuku accepted one for all and entered UA, he never expected to stand in his teacher's home with their wet cat in his arms and water dripping from his hair onto said cat as that cat kept liking his chin. It seemed that Aizawa-sensei hadn't expected it either for the way they froze momentarily. Of course not really revealing any emotions, but Izuku did hear a familiar sigh come from the man. "You're going to wet one of the other cats if you stay like this," Aizawa-sensei said before reaching for the towel that hung around Izuku's neck and Izuku let him. Proceeded to let the man start drying his hair. Right in the hallway as he held Spoon close to him. Spoon, who continued to lick him. Funnily enough, Izuku didn't mind. It reminded him of Seiko drying his hair. although Seiko was a lot more graceful about it. Meanwhile, Aizawa-sensei just kept up a rubbing motion that would not help with the knots Izuku would regularly get in his hair. But he kept his mouth shut. The act was comforting in an odd way and he didn't hate it. That went on for a few seconds until Izuku heard Yamada-sensei's voice cry out, clearly having now seen what his husband was doing. "No show. This is why your hair never gets any love. You're going to make his hair frizzy if you do that," he said, and Izuku could hear that they got closer to the two of them. "Give it here." Suddenly Izuku's vision was clear once more and he saw Yamada-sensei had a hold of the towel, sending an indignant look towards the other man. "It's the quickest way to dry it," Aizawa-sensei said. The answer did not satisfy their husband as Izuku heard him sigh in frustration, though there was a little smile. What's logical does not count when it comes to hair care. "Now shoo before you cause any more damage," Yamada-sensei said before proceeding to give his husband a push. Funnily enough, Aizawa let him and walked away. Izuku looked back at Yamada-sensei, who smiled at him and looked at his hair. "Ah, your hair is all messy now. I'll fix it. I'm not going to let another head of hair be ruined under my watch. Come on, Izuku, follow me." Izuku diligently followed Spoon, still in his arms, who had finally stopped liking his chin. He was led to the couch he had slept on a couple of days ago, and then Yamada-sensei was sitting near him, taking a closer look at his hair. "Izuku, do you mind if I fix your hair for you?" the man asked honestly. "I can just give you a brush and the product to do it yourself if you don't want me touching it." Izuku let himself think the offer over. He was still wary of touch at times, like tight grips on his shoulders and arms. But other touches he found he liked. It helped that the league was quite touchy when it came down to it. Dabi slung his arm loosely around his shoulders. Himiko and Jin, of course, didn't have any issues getting close. Even Tamura would sit beside him and Kurojiri would pat his head. Magna helped massage his hands, and Spinner liked to nudge him when something funny happened. Then there was Seiko. Izuku remembered how Seiko helped with his hair, and he remembered the sensation of those fingers running through his green curls. It had felt nice. It'd be nice to feel something like that again. And Yamada-sensei was nice too. "I'm okay with you doing it," Izuku said. The responding smile he got made Izuku a bit happier that he decided to let Yamada-sensei fix his hair. Hizashi wanted to hug and strangle Shoyuta when he saw what his husband was doing. There, not even a few feet from the bathroom, he saw his husband drying Izuku's head with a towel in the most thorough way. It made him have flashbacks to seeing Shoyuta do that to his hair after showers at UA after training sessions. While Shoyuta had gotten better with Hizashi's nagging, here he was again. Ridiculous. But he couldn't help feeling warm with how Shoyuta was doing it in the first place. Especially since Hizashi always thought that drying someone's hair was something more for family. His father had helped his mother with her hair routinely. So seeing his husband doing that while Izuku looked relaxed and allowing Shoyuta to do so tugged at Hizashi's heartstrings. But even if it was heartwarming, Hayashi really couldn't let it continue and intervened. He led Izuku to the couch where he tried to fix the now rat's nest of hair that Sho had created in his logical hair drying method. Except before he could do that, he had to make sure Izuku would be fine with it. Drying someone's hair with a towel like Sho did was no matter, but fixing and brushing and putting product to get rid of knots and prevent frizz seemed more NTMT, and Hizashi really didn't want to make the teen uncomfortable. So he asked to check and witnessed a thoughtful look come across the freckled face. Eyes clearly thinking back to memories before settling with an almost soft look before he agreed. Hizashi smiled in excitement and rushed to get the necessary materials, leaving Izuku with Spoon, who was slowly drying along with Izuku's help and Shuta's towel. When Hizashi came back, it was to see another cat on Izuku's lap, staring at him, although the boy stared right back at them. Then he saw them sniffing around Izuku's face. When the whiskers got around Izuku's eyes, he simply closed them. The cats clearly had taken a liking to Izuku. "The cats really like you. And I'm not sure how Spoon got inside the bathroom. He just sometimes pops into the shower. I should have warned you before," Hizashi said, although he was sure Izuku didn't mind Spoon's company if the wrapped cat didn't show it. "He's in there a lot?" the teen asked softly. Hizashi nodded as he put the 2 bottles and a brush on the couch. He likes water and likes us. He doesn't get in the way or anything, But sometimes when you're showing early in the morning and forgot to turn on the light, suddenly seeing a glowing eye makes for a dangerous shower. Izuku's eyes widened as he told the story. Did you get hurt? Hisashi chuckled. Oh me. He waved it off. Nope. I was asleep. But Sho did nurse a bump on his head for the next 2 days. It was amusing to see the realization in those green eyes about who it was exactly that had been the person in the story. Hisashi had told Namuri and Tensei the story, but it was nice to see someone else's reaction knowing he wouldn't be so much at risk of injury if his husband were to find out exactly who he told. If anything, Hisashi thought it would be good to let Izuku know that Shoyuta wasn't as scary as he seemed. Though he had a feeling the kid already knew that a bit. But a little extra information never hurt anyone. Alright, let me see what knots we have here before I start brushing, Hisashi said, giving Izuku a chance to back out if he wanted. He was pleased with the nod he got in response. The first thought Hisashi had when he finally touched Izuku's hair was, so soft. There were about 4 knots that had to be undone before brushing, but they weren't too much of a hassle and Izuku looked content sitting there with 2 cats on his lap. A now almost dry Spoon and Yesterday were enjoying the pets they were getting from the teen. Then Hisashi got to brush the hair. It was a brush more fitting for waves and curls, one he had gotten for Shoyuta who never used it. Hisashi felt meditative with the repetitive movement and warm inside his chest when he caught sight of Izuku's eyes slightly drooping with it. Clearly, the kid was tired and Hisashi knew how nice it was to have someone mess with your hair. After brushing, he announced he'd be using a product to help with the curls and frizziness. Hisashi ran his fingers through the curls. Satisfied when he didn't find any knots or sections where his fingers got stuck. Then he went for the smaller bottle of hair serum. It was one Hisashi used himself. Was that? Izuku asked in a mumble, clearly having been lulled in a dazed state by the hair treatment. Just hair serum. It makes sure things are kept healthy and soft. I used it for my own hair. Hisashi heard a hum from the teen. You have pretty hair, the mumbled. Hisashi smiled at the compliment. Thank you Izuku, so do you. Another hum came from Izuku before he went silent again and Hisashi began to put the product in Izuku's hair. It went on like that for a while. Even though Hisashi could continue running his fingers through the soft strands and just let Izuku enjoy the sensation, he was sure Izuku was about to fall asleep. So he retreated his fingers and Izuku opened his eyes to look at him. All done. Now any damage done by Sho is undone and you will have beautiful hair like mine in the morning. Hisashi got a sleepy smile in response and a small mumbled, thanks. That was more than enough from him. Come on, time for bed, he said despite it being rather early for a teen to go to sleep. He knew Izuku was tired so it was better to just let him sleep now. Hisashi ended up leading Izuku to his room, wanting to make sure the boy didn't end up sleeping slumped against the wall like a certain underground hero tended to do. Izuku seemed to drag his limbs under the covers and sunk into the pillows of the bed. It looked like he fell asleep right away. Hisashi left after making sure Izuku was covered by his blankets and he didn't seem to be in an uncomfortable position. When he left, Hisashi swept a cursory look around the teen's new room. Eyeing the knives laid out, he was very glad Spoon was named Spoon. When he got back to his own room, Shoyuta already laying under the covers Hisashi let himself plop onto the bed. He looked up at Shoyuta who was looking at him with a curious look. Hisashi groaned in response. I'm going to get attached, he said as if he wasn't already attached. He practically melted when I was fixing his hair and even said mine was pretty. Shoyuta didn't say anything but Hisashi could tell the man was amused. He's a bit like you know, Hisashi said. Not as intimidating of course, probably is in his own way though, but loves all that physical contact. At this, Shoyuta finally spoke. Looks that way. Hisashi groaned at the 3-worded response he got but gave the man a kiss anyway. He was satisfied enough by the look on Shuta's face when he compared him to Izuku. When Izuku fell asleep he once again found himself in the gray place. He wondered if he would come up with a better name for it. Like last time he was seated next to someone while the other past holders stood before him. But before he could say anything, the gray figure he thought was named Sora asked him a question. Can you see all of us clearly? Izuku looked around and saw that all 8 figures were clear, albeit with different colored auras surrounding them. The man he was sitting next to had a combination of a green and white aura. Sora was gray and Banjo was red. The woman with the beauty mark had a black aura, there was a man with dark purple, another man with light blue, and the woman he had danced with had a light purple aura. Off to the side, Izuku saw someone that looked like gold flames. He looked back at Sora and nodded. Sora grinned and clapped their hands together. Good. Now introductions can be done with names and you won't be confused about who's who and all that. I can assume you already know that we're the past holders of the quirk one for all. Yeah, took me a while but I finally realized it, Izuku said, remembering how dumb he felt when he finally made the realization. Don't worry about it. But first things first, the dude you're leaning against is Yoichi, the first holder. I am Sora, the second holder. Our wonderful dancer, Sora gestured to the woman with the light purple aura, is Mai, the third holder. The dark purple scaredy cat with lines on his face is Shinomori Hikage, fourth holder. You already know the fifth holder, Banjo Daijuro. Mr. Mysterious over there, they pointed at the man with the light blue aura who had their mouth covered by a high collar, is N, the sixth holder. Then we have Shimura Nana, the seventh holder, and you already know about numero ocho. With that, Sora smiled as if they were the presenter of a show, and Izuku had a feeling that they were more playful than everyone there. Then, remembering the first holder, Izuku looked at Yoichi, who was still sitting beside him. Yoichi smiled at him but remained silent. Meanwhile, the other holders were coming towards Sora. Their expressions with either amusement or annoyance at how Sora introduced them. Izuku watched the bickering with a smile on his face and remained seated with Yoichi. For a moment, he thought he could hear a small chuckle come from the first holder. When Izuku woke up, there was something on his chest and partially on his face. More specifically, there was an orange tabby cat staring down at him. Snorting, Izuku shifted to sit up and lifted Kimchi. He was vaguely reminded of a sack of potatoes as he looked at the limp, heavy cat in his hold. Good morning, Kimchi. Kimchi meowed loudly in response. Izuku then heard Yamada-sensei yell from the kitchen, "You already ate kimchi, don't try to act starved." Izuku huffed in amusement at the small meow that sounded oddly disappointed. Kimchi let out in response. When he set her back on his lap, she was quick to jump off and walk out of his room, seeming to have given up on convincing him to give her food. He wondered if that would become a routine. Quietly, Izuku went to grab any toiletries and used the bathroom. Glad to have not run into anyone yet, but he could hear sounds coming from the kitchen where one of his teachers was. It sounded like he was cooking. After using the bathroom, Izuku returned to his room. He got dressed and massaged his hands, finding that the pain was lower than usual so he could go a bit without gloves. But before leaving the room, Izuku paused, thinking about if he could talk. Yes, he had greeted Kimchi, but Kimchi was a cat. Talking to a cat never proved to be an issue. It was talking to people that he realized was stressing him out so much. Already, talking in the past had been difficult. Some people he never dared to speak to out of fear. He could remember the looks of disgust he had gotten a few times he had tried. It was a risk to open his mouth at times. There were moments where Inko had asked questions he was never to reply to and moments where a response was demanded. There were teachers who didn't want him to speak in class, and teachers that loved to call him out in class. Yue had been different, but he still felt times when he had fear about speaking. About saying the wrong thing. Obviously, though, his self-preservation had waned in his time with the League. Saying things he was sure no one would have ever said to them. Then there were the days that he was silent with the League, where he hadn't uttered a word. Now after everything, there were moments where words seemed impossible to get out. Except Yamada-sensei had said it was okay. Even going as far as to reassure him the first time words failed to come out. The man told him that even he had times where he was mute too and that he could show him some sign language and help him learn. Then there was Ishi-san. Someone Nedzu contacted to help him despite his silence. She didn't have a problem with it either. No one had a problem with it. Yamada and Aizawa-sensei were completely fine with his silence the day before. Aizawa-sensei had even talked to him, content to take nods and looks as responses. Yamada-sensei didn't even make it a big deal when Izuku let out a few words while they fixed his hair. So now there Izuku was, in his room humming and gradually checking that any sounds he wanted to make would come out. He even imagined that he was speaking to his teachers, not Kimchi, as he said, "Good morning." He sighed in relief when he didn't feel as if there was a lock on his jaw or a heavy tongue. When he walked out and headed towards the kitchen, he messed with the marble necklace resting against his chest. Walking quietly, he saw that Yamada-sensei humming along with a song on the radio while cooking. The man had yet to greet him or turn around. However, when the song got a particularly energetic part, he spun around and caught sight of the teen. "Izuku. Good morning." "Morning," Izuku responded, garnering a large smile from the man. "Oh, here is the sign for good morning if you ever find yourself mute or just not vocal in the morning. Just to remind you, Shoyuda, and I don't mind and won't be upset if that ever happens at any time of the day or night." "All right." Izuku nodded. "Good, now this is what you do," Yamada-sensei said before slowly signing the phrase. Izuku copied it and repeated it after Yamada-sensei did it a few more times. Shoyuda walked out of the hallway with half-closed eyes on the lookout for B. But instead of a cat, he saw the sight of his husband teaching his student how to sign good morning. Hizashi looked positively happy at seeing Izuku sign the phrase correctly. He praised him before returning back to the stove where, hopefully, the food had not gotten burned. No longer focused on learning a new sign, Shoyuda saw it when Izuku finally saw him. "Good morning, Aizawa-sensei." "Just Aizawa is fine outside of class," Shoyuda said. He was already referring to his student by their given name, and he'd rather not have them so formal with him now that he was living with them. He would say to just call him Shoyuda, but he had a feeling that it might be too much for the teen. "And just Yamada for me, but at school, I'm present Mike or Mike." Hizashi piped up from the kitchen. Shoyuda could see the wheels turning inside of Izuku's head before they gave a soft, "Okay," and Hizashi was coming towards them with 2 bowls, gesturing to Izuku to go to the dining table. As Izuku and Hizashi went to go sit down, Shoyuda went to the kitchen to get himself a cup of well-deserved coffee. The smell of it seemed to wake up, and he felt better as he sat down and joined the others. Silently, Izuku and Hizashi ate with music playing in the background. But after a minute, Shoyuda noticed that Izuku had been staring at him in a certain way. It was reminiscent of how he would stare at him in the infirmary. It was the look he gave him when Nurse Iwasaki had given the 2 of them food, but Shoyuda had yet to eat any of it. Taking a sip of coffee, Shoyuda lifted his eyes to meet Izuku's. "Yes?" he asked, despite knowing full well what the teen meant with his stare. Izuku made a show of looking at his own food and then to the empty space beside Shuda's coffee cup. Then he stared back at him. Shoyuda sighed. "Fine." With that, Shoyuda got up and went to the kitchen to serve himself some food. He could hear Hizashi snickering as he plated the food that Hizashi had left for him. When he sat back, stared at Izuku as he took his first bite. The teen looked smug before returning their attention to their own food. Hizashi, on the other hand, was beaming at seeing the interaction. Shoyuda deliberately made sure to not look in his husband's direction. When they finished, Shoyuda had to sneakily grab Izuku's bowl that the kid was trying to take to the kitchen and wash. Hizashi gave him a kiss on his cheek while they put their bowl in the sink that Shoyuda had begun to wash the dishes in. It was routine for them to wash the dishes after the other cooked. While Shoyuda washed his bowl, he thought back to the discussion he had with Hizashi the night before. It had been about the Magna's voicemail and the fact that Izuku now had a large collection of knives. Neither of them thought the League had packed them maliciously and that it was unlikely that Izuku would use them to hurt himself, but it was still a worry. It helped, though, that Shoyuda had seen Izuku handle the knives. The teen had seemed more embarrassed by the large number of them, but clearly handled them with care and no sign that would hint towards an unhealthy relationship with them. Shoyuda had seen how some people looked at the tools people used for self-harm, but he didn't see that in Izuku and the knives. However, he couldn't dismiss it. And it was important to talk to Izuku about it if he was Izuku's guardian, who was supposed to care not only about his physical but mental well-being as well. With that in mind, Shoyuda finished washing the dishes and joined the others who were still seated at the table. Hizashi already telling Izuku that they wanted to talk about something. Shoyuda felt guilty at the anxious look his student now had as he sat down. But this was important. "Izuku, Shoyuda gestured to himself and Hizashi, Want to make it clear that we don't pity you or judge you for anything. Like Netsu told you, we are concerned about your mental health, he said, wanting to make it clear to Izuku that he could be open with them. Shoyuta wanted Izuku to be able to trust them. Almost warily he saw Izuku nod at what he already said. Because of that, Shoyuta continued. We have some concerns about all the knives. At his words, Shoyuta saw Izuku's eyes widen before the boy was waving his hands around. You think, but I don't hurt myself with them, he said frantically. Shoyuta was about to say something else until he caught a look from Hizashi to let Izuku talk. Then Hizashi looked back at Izuku and Shoyuta saw his husband give the teen an encouraging look. Izuku took a steadying breath before speaking, albeit quieter than before. I know the league told you about me and I know how it looks. It is a lot of knives, Izuku said bluntly. But I don't self-harm, well, not like that, 'cause breaking my bones isn't exactly painless. Not that I do that on purpose, well, not on purpose to hurt myself. It's just hard to control my quirk, and sometimes to do something I just had to break a few bones. Pretty hard to control it when no one has ever. He dash. Suddenly Izuku snapped his mouth shut. A frown on his face and eyebrows furrowed in anger that Shoyuta and Hizashi felt was focused on someone else. But then Izuku smoothed out the expression on his face and took a breath before looking back at them. I don't hurt myself with the knives, I promise, he said. I'm not going to. I'd never do that, especially not with those knives. The two adults saw how seriously Izuku had said the last part. They saw how Izuku's hands were gripping each tightly and how he looked at them with sincerity. We believe you, Izuku, Hizashi said. We do, but I do think that there should be a better and safer way to store them. Shoyuta saw Izuku blush. The teen was most likely thinking about how they arranged all 24 on the floor while he had watched. It was relieving to see that Izuku was more embarrassed about the knives than angry or upset. Shoyuta knew that anyone would be a little panicked at someone suggesting what they suggested, but it seemed that Izuku understood why they were concerned. It reminded Shoyuta of the little bit he had been able to talk about Izuku in regards to his mental health before he had gone missing. I have some ways you can store them, Shoyuta said. You probably already know I use knives in my hero work, and although I don't have quite the collection you have, I can give them a safe place to be stored. How does that sound? Izuku, still looking more embarrassed than nervous as before, said, Sounds good. Hizashi chuckled. Now with items and storage, there's all your things at the apartment, Izuku. Do you want to go get your stuff? We can send someone to get it, or you can get it with supervision, or if you want Shoyuta and I can get it for you. It's up to you and there's no rush. Izuku looked pensive and the two men would see the teen was warming his hands a little bit. Can we go? Izuku asked. Hizashi looked at Shoyuta, who gave him a nod. Yeah, we can go. Izuku didn't let go of his necklace as he sat in the back of the car. He just stared out the window looking at the blur of colors as Yamada-san, because no way was he going to call his teacher by just their last name without any type of honorific, drove. He didn't want to go back there. He didn't want Aizawa-san or Yamada-san to see that apartment again. But Izuku didn't want his stuff there anymore. Izuku knew that he could have just let the two men pack up his things on their own, but he felt as if should do it himself. He should be the one packing his things way into a box and removing it from that suffocating place. Aizawa-san was already going to help store his knives, and oh how he was mortified that. They were worried he was going to hurt himself with them. He couldn't ask them to help with more of his things. I should be the one to do it. That's what he kept repeating to himself as they finally arrived and made their way to the front door. Aizawa-san already taking out the key and handing it over to him. Izuku took a deep breath before inserting the key and turning it, listening to that familiar sound of it unlocking. As he opened the door, light streaked into the unlit apartment. And Izuku felt the tension leave his body at the sight before him. There, leaning against the wall with a smile and familiar sunglasses, was Magna. Hey there, Izuku. Magna felt relief when she finally saw Izuku. The others were a bit worried about the kid. Himiko specifically was particularly anxious, and Jean was actually the one to reason with her that he was probably okay. It didn't help though that a moment later Jean was saying that he was freaked out and ready to kidnap Izuku again. To ease their worries, Magna decided that she could somehow check up on Izuku. She wanted to see if he was back in the apartment, and as luck would have it, She heard the door unlocking and saw a familiar head of green hair belonging to the person who opened it. She couldn't resist smiling. "Hey there, Izuku." Quickly she took in any details that could mean that he wasn't okay. But other than his ever-present dark circles, he seemed all right. He was wearing his gloves for his hands and the necklace with Seiko's marble was front and center. She didn't see any new injuries or looks of distress on his face. In fact, it looked like he got some sleep. Izuku also looked happy to see her, which helped with any doubts she and the others were having recently about if the kid even liking them. Those doubts were most definitely erased when suddenly Izuku was hugging her. It was natural to hug him back, but she looked at the two men who were still at the entrance, one of them holding boxes. They were watching her with analytical eyes, but she didn't see any sign of aggression or anger. Even the underground here she had met only a few days ago didn't seem particularly bothered by her presence. "Nice to see you again, Eraserhead." "Magna," he greeted. She moved her eyes over to the man with the long blonde hair. "And you are?" she asked. The man didn't at all seem intimidated by her and instead smiled amicably. "I'm Yamada, Izuku's English teacher." As Yamada spoke, Magna noted how Izuku didn't tense up and how the man had used Izuku's first name instead of Midoriya. Letting go of Izuku and looking at his face, she gestured to the men, checking to see if they really were okay. An amused look came across Izuku's face as he gave her a reassuring nod. She ruffled his hair. "So what are you doing here, she asked. "Getting my stuff," Izuku said. "I'm living with Aizawa-san on campus." "It's just Aizawa kid," Eraserhead said, and Magna could hear the man sounded amused. Izuku, on the other hand, shook his head and didn't reply. Instead, he said, "I'll start packing my room." Before anyone could say anything, the teen was already walking toward his room. Magna shot the two men a smile before going after Izuku. She wasn't about to miss seeing what kind of room the little assistant had. Much to her pleasure, it seemed that the little assistant was indeed a fanboy. "Don't tell Dabi," Izuku said once she had walked in. She smiled and Izuku sighed at the lack of her response before beginning to go through his drawers. "Want me to help you take down your posters?" Magna asked, eyeing all the different ones he had up. "Sure," he said, and she could see him lightly smiling before he frowned. "Don't touch the All Might ones though." After that, Magna helped take down the hero posters. Happy to not touch the blonde a-hole with the perpetual smile while Izuku folded his clothes and took out smaller trinkets from a small bookcase and shelves. Magna noted how he seemed to be looking for something. "I can't find my notebooks," he suddenly said. "What about those notebooks?" she asked, pointing to the small pile on his bed. "No, those aren't the ones I'm looking for. I can't find my hero analysis ones, they are supposed to be here," he said, and Magna could see Izuku was getting distressed the longer he couldn't find them. Wondering if the two teachers knew about them, Magna walked out towards the dining room where the two men were sitting. A pile of boxes on the table. They looked up at her approach. "Izuku can't find his hero analysis notebooks," she said bluntly. When she said that, she saw a look of realization across the two faces and Eraserhead stood up. He grabbed the boxes. "I know where they are and I'll help him finish packing," he said, and then promptly left. Magna and Yamada both watched his retreating figure before looking at each other. It was silent before Yamada asked, "So, where did you get those glasses?" When Shoyuta got to Izuku's room, he saw the teen was looking around a bit more frantically than he was comfortable with, so he wasted no time saying, "Netsu has your notebooks. Hizashi had taken them to see if they held any clues when you went missing. They're at UA and I'm sure Netsu will be happy to give them back whenever you want." Izuku seemed to freeze in place before slowly releasing the tension in his body. "Oh." He stood up and faced Shoyuta. "He'll really give them back?" Shoyuta nodded and placed the boxes on Izuku's bed. "Yeah, he'll give them back. They're not his after all, and even though he's not human, Netsu does respect some human concepts such as property." Izuku walked toward the bed and started to put some of his things in them. "He does." "Yes, and he is also aware of the concept of being a pain in my butt. It's probably the DMN rat's favorite concept." Shoyuta smiled when he heard Izuku laugh. After a few awkward moments of standing until Izuku said, "You know you can sit down, I don't mind." Shoyuta finally sat down and simply watched as Izuku put his things away, not needing any help at all. Izuku didn't seem uncomfortable with his presence in his room. Although he noticed how quickly Izuku took down the sketch of his erasure goggles when he had looked away. Other than that, he saw how carefully Izuku handled his things. Especially the notebook he remembered from the last time he had been in his student's room. It was the notebook with the odd combination of sketches of teacups, murder scenes, and a city surrounded by long grass. It made him wonder what they meant, what the small smile Izuku had on his face as he put it in a box meant. Funnily, one of the last things that Izuku put in a box was the old-handled present mic radio, the one that Hisashi looked so happy to see the last time they had been there. He could get you a newer radio if you wanted. In fact, I think he'd give you one with an autograph, Shoyuta said, gesturing to the radio. Izuku sat down on his bed, the box in the middle of them from where Shoyuta sat down on the other side. Nah, I like this one. I've had it since I was little, Izuku said softly. With that they sat in silence, the two of them looking at the almost empty room. All that seemed left was All Might merchandise. You know, Shoyuta said casually. The posters and figures would go for a good amount of money in their condition. He saw Izuku frown and look at the poster before looking back at him. Can you sell them for me? Izuku asked. Shoyuta let himself smile his signature Cheshire grin, pleased at how Izuku didn't seem bothered by it. Gladly. Izuku felt oddly happy as he walked out of his childhood bedroom with his things packed away and his homeroom teacher behind him. He was leaving. He was finally leaving. Izuku wouldn't have to come home to an empty apartment. He wouldn't have to feel green eyes staring holes into his back or feel like a ghost in his own home. He didn't even have to deal with All Might's face staring down at him every time he was in his room. He wasn't going to live there anymore. Izuku was almost in a daze at the realization and didn't realize someone had removed the box he was holding until he was picked up and being hugged. Magna was hugging him again. Her arms tight and secure around him, a warm hand cupping the back of his head. Izuku noted how his feet weren't even touching the ground. You really are strong, he said to her quietly with a voice that sounded like he was getting choked up. Her grip tightened. Izuku let out a shaky breath when she said, You are too, Izuku. When they finally left the apartment, Magna had disappeared into a familiar warp gate. Meanwhile, Hisashi, Shoyuta, and Izuku each carried a box of belongings. The two adults made sure to carry their respective boxes with the utmost care. Izuku was silent as they loaded the car and drove off. He only spoke when the apartment building was out of sight. It was a small, thank you, and nothing else. That was enough. When they returned back home, they left Izuku alone in his new room and boxes so he could start taking things out and settling in. The two men took seats on the couch. I liked her, Hisashi said, breaking the silence of looking towards the hallway where Izuku's door was. Shoyuta looked back at his husband. She's a criminal, he stated simply. I know, but she had a funny story about her glasses. Did you know that it's possible for someone to insult and then get accidentally engaged to someone in one sentence? And apparently, that's not the craziest thing she's been involved in. I wish I got to ask her about her serenading a magician though. Oh, but I did get to show her a website where she can buy more shades. She seemed happy with that. Oh, come on, Hisashi nudged Shuta's arm. You have to have more than that. What did you think of her? Izuku didn't hesitate to hug her. They're obviously close and I could see she was concerned about him. Izuku was comfortable with her. Do you think he's comfortable with us? Hisashi watched as a pensive expression came across Shuta's face. Partially. Remember, we were his teachers first and we let him down. But he does seem to like us, Shoyuta ended up saying, remembering how in the voicemail Magna said in particular that Izuku liked him. Do you think he likes me? Shoyuta sent his husband a disbelieving look. Zashi, he liked hanging out with you in the infirmary. He let you fix his hair. You taught him how to sign, good morning, and he had one of your old radios that he's attached to. I don't think you need to be concerned about whether or not he likes you. Still dash. Still nothing. You're being illogical. I do dash. Zashi, do you want me to ask him? Hisashi reached out his arms as if to stop Shoyuta from even getting off the couch. No. That'll put pressure, and what if he just says yes to not hurt my feelings? Your feelings? Hisashi frowned. Yes, DM it. Like I said yesterday, I'm attached, okay? After all that time, you spent worrying about him before he even went missing and how he was in my class. And now he's living here, I've become attached. I blame you, it's really your fault. Always referring to him as problem child, all fondly and everything. Seriously, despite what everyone thinks, you're such a softy dash. Slowly as the words had come out, Shuta's face had become red until he grabbed a pillow and smushed it against the other man's face, finally cutting him off. But even with the pillow, the man kept talking, and when he started to use his quirk, Shoyuta let his eyes flash red. While keeping the pillow down and fighting against flailing limbs, BSRD walked by the couch. Clearly unfazed by the commotion. He stared at the two men like they were beneath him. Feeling the cat's gaze, Shoyuta looked at him. Don't judge me, BSRD. You did this to Spoon just last week. Unaware of the marriage squabble, and possibly murder, Izuku was in his room listening to music from his present mic radio. It had a new spot on his nightstand. Spoon was laying on his bed, watching him take out a few clothes. After putting away the items from the apartment, he turned his attention to the clothes from the league. He was unfolding one of Tamura's black hoodies when he noticed something was in the pocket. Reaching in, Izuku pulled something out. It was a phone. On it was a sticky note. Use this phone to talk to us, Izuku-kun. Himiko. He smiled and turned the phone on. When he saw the lock screen, he let out a chuckle. It was a selfie Himiko obviously took. In the background, he could see Kurojiri behind the bar. A warp open and another spitting out Jean, who was once Aegon, trying to dive into behind the bar. When he unlocked the phone, Izuku saw that the home screen was different photo. This one was of Tamura being held back by Spinner, while Dabi had a sheet-eating grin and seemed completely unfazed by the 5 fingers reaching out towards him. This time Seiko had joined Himiko in the selfie, their fingers held up in a peace sign. Opening the chat app, he sent a message to the only group chat he saw. Lilbut, so what exactly is happening in the photos? Lilbut, wait, why am I Lilbut? Hand K. Dabi is the one who chose the names and he FENG locked it somehow. Dabi. It stands for Little Assistant. Big Sis, there are better nicknames for that. Dabi. It's funny. Knife Gremlin, I like my name. Jean, your name is accurate, Himiko. Magic 8 Ball, Magnus is very accurate while I feel undervalued. Autosexual, I don't like cars this much. Giri, Dabi, would you change Izuku's name to something more appropriate? Dabi, sure thing. Dabi has changed Lilbut to Knife Princess. Knife Princess, thank you. Giri, also Tamura's and Spinner's as well. Dabi, Dabi changed Hand K to RIP Door Handles. Dabi changed Autosexual to Sword Dude. RIP Door Handles, at least it's not disgusting. Sword Dude, it's a katana. Dabi, I know, smiley face. Knife Princess, Dabi, can you change Seiko's name to Houdini? Dabi, what the hell is Houdini? Knife Princess, oh, he is a pre-quirk escape artist, illusionist, and stunt performer. I think Seiko would like to see what he did. He was really famous, and there are actually a bunch of theories about how he was able to do what he did. A couple people said he had doubles or was somehow cheating. One of the theories was that he was someone who had something like a quirk, but some people say it was too early for that gene to have showed up. Another theory was that he was an alien, and click to see more. Magic 8 Ball, oh, I would love to have that nickname, thank you Izuku. Dabi changed Magic 8 Ball to Houdini. Dabi, I didn't know you could type so much. Knife Princess, if there is a will there is a way. And my will to learn anything and everything and share it is as vast as the oceans and space that holds an infinite amount of galaxies as it expands until the end of time. Knife Princess, which is super cool and like makes me feel super small and insignificant at times. But like think of all the possible stars and planets that are out there and no one has seen. Imagine the possibilities of life, the different forms life can take and what languages there are. Ways of culture. Like what if they have similar ways of greeting or completely different ways to show affection between friends and family? Do they even have concepts like that? Do they know love, sorrow, anger, vengeance, happiness, joy? How different are they from us, from me? Knife Princess. Do they think they're alone in the universe? Do they even wonder what I wonder? At the bar, the League was scattered on their couches and seat looking at their phones, reading the possible existential crisis Izuku was having. Dabi looked up at the others. How do we respond to that? Should we go get him? Spinner asked. It's only been a few days and he's having a crisis. No. This is regular existential crisis stuff, Tamura said. Already typing something in response to Izuku. That sheet should not be regular, Spinner said. At that Tamura stopped typing and looked at Spinner, simply lifting an eyebrow. After a few moments, Spinner conceded with a slightly different color on his cheeks. Point taken. With that, the conversation changed to how Tamura somehow managed to discuss a space exploration game with Izuku, effectively drawing the teen's attention from the existence of life in the universe. As the chat became more filled with Tamura and Izuku's conversation, Himiko turned to Magna, who sat beside her on the couch. How was Izuku-kun when you saw him? Did he look all right? Magna put down her phone and leaned more into Himiko. He looked like he had been sleeping, which was good. He looked more alive and wasn't tense with the two teachers that had come with him to the apartment. Eraserhead, right? Yeah, that and another named Yamada. Izuku didn't seem worried about the two of them even when I was there. Also, Yamada was nice. He told me where I could get more shades if I wanted. Seiko suddenly appeared beside Magna, draping his body partially on her lap like he had been mortally wounded. His hand reached up towards Magna's face before clutching at his chest. Has our dear Magna perchance been seduced? Oh, how many hearts including my own will suffer? Magna stayed unaffected as Himiko smiled next to her at the scene. You're ridiculous, Magna said. If anything, I think the teacher was more your type than mine. They even had long hair. Seiko's face of pain quickly morphed into one of curiosity. He brought a finger to his mouth in thought. That does sound alluring. Eraserhead had long hair as well, and his eyes were ever so dark. Jean, who sat next to Spinner on the couch across from the others, leaned toward Spinner. Should we warn Izuku that Seiko might hit on his teachers? Nah, I want to see how that plays out. Wonder if he'd freak out. Spinner said. What? Like you would if someone hit on you? Asked Dabi from his new position of leaning over the back of Spinner's couch. It smiled teasingly. Do you even have any idea how to flirt? Spinner frowned, looking at Dabi. F off, I wouldn't freak out. And I know how to flirt too, what do you know? Can't imagine you being anything other than a div to anyone. Ouch, I'm hurt, Spinner. I can be quite the romantic if I wa dash. Dabi was cut off by Himiko's body colliding with his as she had launched herself from the other couch and off the coffee table. Her laughter quickly covered up Dabi's curses. He had only managed to push her off only for his eyes to widen as he saw Jean climbing over the couch to jump on top of the dog pile that was being created. It was a flail of limbs and a few knives carefully dodged. You were saying? Spinner asked as he looked down behind the couch at Dabi, who winced at the elbows and knees digging into his ribs. Eventually, much to Izuku's amusement, Tamura was pulled away from the phone by Kurogyri and Izuku returned to making sure things were put away in the new room. He thought he might want to get a bookshelf to put his notebooks and knickknacks. Maybe some shelves too. When he took a seat on the floor to look around and at his knives, Bihi had come in and plopped down onto Izuku's lap, reaching a paw up to tap Izuku's face. Then Kimchi came in and climbed on top Izuku's lap too, plopping down on top of BS30. Bihi meowed in distress from his squished position before Izuku scooped up Kimchi and lifted her up. Kimchi was limp in his hold and he brought her to his face, nose to nose. He smiled softly at the little puffs of air he could feel coming from the cat and how Kimchi began to lick the tip of his nose. At the motion down below, Izuku looked down at his lap and watched as Spoon, who suddenly appeared, proceeded to lay down on top of Bihi. The calico simply let out a small hiss before going quiet and Spoon closed his eye. Remembering the most sacred law of a cat on lap and how it seemed to be double, Izuku accepted his fate. He leaned back to fully lie on the floor and set Kimchi on his chest. He fell asleep to the sensation of Kimchi kneading his chest. It was 3 hours later when Hisashi finally went to check up on Izuku after surviving the murder attempt from Shoyuta and getting caught up in some paperwork. That whole time Izuku had stayed in his room and he wondered how he was doing. Also Hisashi couldn't find the cats, which was suspicious. Hisashi paused though at the entrance when he saw the scene. His student was effectively a cat bed. All 3 cats sleeping on top of a sleeping teen while there was a concerning amount of knives were nearby. It was funny how the sharp edges seemed to complement the tired visage that Izuku was with cats on top of him. It reminded Hisashi of Shoyuta. That and the fact that Izuku looked content made Hisashi smile. Along with the opportunity to take some photos to show Shoyuta and possibly send to Magna. Shoyuta couldn't deny the comparison Zashi made when he showed him the photo. After all, Shoyuta understood very well the comfort there was in having a cat sleep on top of you. The warmth and pressure never failed to drag him into sweet unconsciousness. So it was with a heavy heart that he went to Izuku's room to wake him up so his sleeping schedule wasn't too messed up and they could get started organizing some knives before it was too late. When he walked into the room, he saw that Kimchi was chewing his student's hair. Meanwhile, Byesteryu was gnawing at one of Spoon's paws while the cutlery-obsessed cat was happily sleeping. Gently Shoyuta scooped Kimchi off of Izuku's chest. "Don't chew on his hair, that's not a part of your diet, you dmed fiend." He put Kimchi in his arms as she pawed at his fingers and began to bite at them softly. When he looked down, he saw that Izuku's eyes were slightly open and looking at him. "Do you need help with Spoon and Byesteryu?" Shoyuta asked. Izuku shook his head. "No thank you. I'm a willing bed. They'll take advantage of you." Izuku shrugged. "It is what it is." "Wise words," Shoyuta said. "But sit up so we can start going over your knives. Spoon can stay squishing Byesteryu as he deserves." Shoyuta felt like he won something when he heard Izuku let out a huff of amusement. Then he joined him on the floor, setting Kimchi on his lap, who finally gave up on eating his finger. "Alright, so how exactly did you get all of these?" Izuku, now sitting up and idly petting Spoon, sounded fond when he responded. "The girl with space buns, Toga, gave them to me. When I was with them, she ended up teaching me some stuff. I even got to watch her fight Spinner, the one with the gecko quirk, which was really cool to see." Shoyuta hummed in acknowledgement and looked over the knives. They were all different, some of them with serrated or smooth edges. A few looked well used while a couple looked relatively brand new. He could see how they belonged to different people from the different conditions they were in. "Are you attached to all of them?" He watched as Izuku looked around at them. "No, there are only a few that I'm really attached to. I think Toga was just trying to fit as much as possible into the bag, so she shouldn't mind too much if I don't keep all of them." "How good are you with them?" At this question, Izuku turned slightly red and the teen held out a hand making a seesaw motion, meaning SOSO. "Aha," Shoyuta said, making it clear that he didn't believe him, causing Izuku's blush to grow. "I'm sure Toga would completely agree with your assessment of your skills. But for now, pick out the knives that you're okay with getting rid of and the ones you want to keep." An hour later, Hisashi walked into a concerning conversation. "I'll keep some serrated blades. They can help with cutting through material like ropes. I even have one to help cut my capture weapon if I need to." "What if I'm fighting someone?" Izuku asked. "There's a lot of differing opinions. Depends on what the function of the knife is. How much pain do you want to cause? You want to effectively cut tendons or arteries? The types of damage you're trying to do will determine what type of weapon you will use. For example, say if a criminal were trying to torture Sumio Dash." Hisashi looked and saw that Izuku was avidly listening and that Shoyuta was getting into a mode of lecturing the more gruesome things that he didn't think was necessary to go over at the moment. He clapped his hands, drawing their attention and effectively cutting off Shuta's sentence. "Okay. First, show reminder that Izuku is not one of your underground colleagues and I don't like torture talk in front of the cats. Byesteryu tends to look more murderous after them. And second, it's getting late and you have patrol, so let's eat an early dinner, yeah?" The two on the floor nodded and proceeded to get up. Hisashi watched them as they left the room and saw 2 piles of knives on the floor, several serrated edges staring at him. Along with Byesteryu, who looked unhappy that he was no longer laying on Izuku's lap. He kept his eyes on the cat as it reached a paw toward the bigger pile of knives. "Nope," Hisashi said as he turned around and walked away from the room. After dinner, Izuku watched as Aizawa-san got ready for patrol. He knew that Eraserhead worked late, but he never really thought about the process it took to get ready and who he might have been leaving at home. With a natural sort of efficiency, the two men worked and moved around each other. Aizawa-san went over any reports about the recent activity or things another underground hero he was working with wanted to let him know about it. Meanwhile, Yamada-san prepared a small snack bag and brought out the weapon and goggles Eraserhead used. "Hey, did you make any headway about the robbery at that jewelry store?" Yamada-san asked. Not looking up from his computer, Aizawa-san responded, "We were looking to see if it was actually an inside job with how the cameras had been disabled at just the moment when the robbers got in." A pensive look appeared on Yamada-san's face. "What security company did the store use?" "QP Security Systems." "Oh, that company's been under some fire with installing additional cameras without permission and using it to gain access to a couple of business servers. They're still checking on a lot of locations, so there might actually be some security footage if they hadn't reached that jewelry store yet." Izuku watched as Aizawa-san paused and looked at his husband for a moment. Yamada-san was oblivious to the look. From what Izuku could tell, the look was one of respect, but more familiar than that. It felt private, and Izuku quickly looked away. Eventually, Aizawa-san stopped looking and grabbed his things, Yamada-san following him to the door. Izuku heard them say a quick, "Goodbye, love you," before he heard the door close and Yamada-san came back. "All right, Aiza-dash." The sound of the door opening cut him off, and Izuku saw Aizawa-san at the door looking at him. He seemed to pause for a moment before speaking. "Good night, Izuku." Izuku looked back. "Night, sensei." "It's just Aizawa, kid," and then the door was closed and locked again. Izuku turned to look back at Yamada-san. "All right, Izuku," the man said. "Want to practice some sign language?" For a moment, Shoyuta had forgotten that Izuku had been there. Though not in a way that you forgot someone was there at all. The teen was on the couch with two cats and hadn't made a sound as he had gotten ready. Instead, Izuku seemed to just watch as he gathered his things and talked to Hizashi about a case. Shoyuta had noted that it didn't feel as if there was an unwelcome presence in his home. It had felt normal in a sense, but it was when he had been thinking of contacting the detective on the robbery case in the hallway that he remembered that he had forgotten to say goodbye to Izuku. Izuku was still being stubborn about not calling him just Aizawa, as Shoyuta had said. He was sure that Hizashi would tease him about it later. But for now, he'd simply remind Izuku that he didn't need to be so formal with them without pushing too much. With that, Eraserhead began his patrol. The night had gone well. There had been a car thief, 2 attempted muggings, and a lost man looking for the bus station. Overall, nothing too concerning, and the detective he called had been pleasantly surprised by the information, even promising to thank Present Mike should he run into him again. Eraserhead could feel the strain in his muscles as the end of patrol time neared, and he began to make his way back closer to home. Of course, all the while still scanning the rooftops for any possible last-minute interventions he needed to do. During one of these scans, after jumping onto another roof, he caught a glimpse of a familiar wisp-looking man right as he blinked. Still, he managed to catch the sight of a warp gate closing. The next day, Izuku was up before the others, but he stayed in his room. For a while, he lay in bed, but eventually as it became lighter, Izuku moved. Kimchi was not amused but moved to his lap when Izuku sat on the floor. While he softly brushed his fingers through Kimchi's fur, he looked at the pile of knives. He was going to be keeping 15 of them. It was odd and somehow familiar the way Izuku went over each one with Aizawa-san. He had gone over the pros and cons and possible applications, and even included his own personal opinion about them. Izuku had a feeling that Himiko would have enjoyed going over the knives with them. Izuku had taken into the account the information Aizawa-san gave him, but he also heard a few whispers. If he was right, a lot of them were from Sora, the second holder. Apparently, they had quite a bit of experience with knives and couldn't help but add bits of their own commentary alongside his teachers. Izuku thought that Himiko and Sora would have definitely gotten along. "Oh, you have no idea, kid." The faint whisper from one of the past holders made Izuku smile. Wasn't until an hour after he heard his 2 teachers wake up and make some noises in the living area before he left his room. Kimchi ran from behind him and meowed loudly, heading straight toward Aizawa. Yamada-san turned around with a smile. "I see you have released the hungry beast upon us." Aizawa-san got out the cat food. More like on me, seeing as she's not trying to bite your toes. Your toes deserve to be bitten, Yamada-san quipped back. Hizashi, no one's toes deserve to be bitten at 7:16 in the morning. Now make sure to give Izuku food before he starts thinking your fingers look appetizing. Yamada-san whipped his head back to Izuku, hiding his fingers from view. So what do you think, leftovers for breakfast? Izuku nodded. The day progressed slowly in a way. Everyone doing their own tasks, but soon there was a tension that built. It made Izuku's skin prickle, and he was only relieved when Yamada-san asked if they could talk. As he made his way to a seat across the table, he was reminded of parent-teacher conferences. Or in his case, a teacher-student meeting. Though typically they never happened in said teacher's home at their dining table. Or that the two were married and Izuku could see cat fur sticking to one of their black long-sleeve shirts. I'll cut to the chase, Yamada-san said. It's about your class. Those words brought up specific images. A charred desk. Red eyes glaring at him. Explosions. A burning grip that won't let go. Bakugo Katsuki. Izuku used to think that he and Bakugo would have been friends forever. But now, Izuku just thought of all the ways he's been hurt. He doesn't want to get hurt again. He's tired of getting hurt. He's so diamenti. A tap cut through his thoughts, and he looked to see a finger was pressed against the skin of his hand. Oh, he forgot his gloves this morning. It was a good day pain-wise. Izuku saw that the finger was connected to Yamada-san, who tapped again before his hand retreated. Bakugo was expelled, the man said. What? He attacked you, Izuku. Way outside what should have been allowed by All Might in that spar, and then again in your final practical exam. You weren't even supposed to be paired together. Izuku frowned. Yeah, he turned to Aizawa-san. You told me I wouldn't have to worry about it, but then Bakugo was just there, Izuku said. He couldn't help but feel a bit bitter at how that went down after his teacher said it wouldn't be an issue. Izuku watched as Aizawa-san sat straighter in his chair. I did say that and I'm sorry it happened, Aizawa-san said, his eyes looking straight into Izuku's wide ones. All Might talked to some Hero Commission employee and without permission, changed your match for the final exam. By the time Nedzu was trying to stop the match, Bakugo had already attacked you and you were making your way out through the sewers, which was smart. Good job. Izuku sat frozen in his seat. When he didn't say anything, Yamada-san awkwardly cleared his throat. Anyways, Yamada-san said, when you were gone, they expelled him for his extreme violence. He's been sent to another school, the punishment on his record. He was also sent to therapy and anger management. He wasn't just going to get away with it or be allowed to fester. Izuku didn't say anything. He hadn't been expecting an apology. He definitely hadn't been expecting a compliment. Izuku hadn't even expected this conversation to be happening, to hear that Bakugo was expelled for hurting him. For a long time, it didn't seem to matter to anyone that Bakugo had hurt him. And All Might teaching privileges have been redacted. Yamada-san continued, unaware of the standstill in Izuku's brain. He's an assistant and not allowed to be with students alone, considering how he lets them get hurt. That seemed to push Izuku out of his frozen state. Really? He asked. Yamada-san looked at his husband before back at Izuku. Yes, really. I can't speak for the schools that you've been to before or those teachers. But here at UA, we take safety very seriously. And yes, Yamada-san sighed. There are still some issues, but we have been working to fix them. This was an issue. Nedzu, in particular, was very quick to do this, and he's still trying to fix other issues along with whatever evil plans he makes for fun. The last comment amused Izuku, but soon that was covered by the other whirlwind of emotions. Anger. Happiness. It felt uncomfortable in his chest, too many things to think about and implications or consequences he would have to deal with. He needed to focus. What was the first thing they said at the beginning of this? Oh, Class 1A. Are the others mad? The question slipped out of Izuku's lips before he could stop them. Anxiety threatened to lock his throat and keep more from coming out, but he had to know. I know a few of them were friends with Bakugo and I never responded to their messages when I was gone. Aizawa-san shook his head and for some reason looked amused. No, he said. In fact, they were giving me headaches about trying to go out and look for you. I actually caught Todoroki looking into prices of private detectives with Endeavor's credit card information when he was supposed to be researching something else. Yamada-san snorted, but his husband continued. Your classmates were told you were missing. But other than that, no additional information was given to them. And it doesn't have to be given to them by you either, Izuku. So I can go back? Izuku asked. Yes, you'll have to catch up on some stuff, but you still have your spot in class. Nedza thought that you should have your first appointment with Ishii-san before returning back to class. But we can arrange a small visit beforehand at the new dorms to ease you in. Aizawa-san said. Would you like to do that? Izuku nodded. Alright, I can give them a heads up so it isn't a complete surprise, but I hope you're ready to be hugged. As long as it's not rough, Izuku said. Quickly. Aizawa-san paused but nodded. Anything else I should let them know? Guilt made Izuku uncomfortable, but the prospect of seeing the others also made him a little excited. Izuku didn't want rough hugs or just roughness in general. He didn't know how he would react if he was tackled or grabbed suddenly without warning. His other worry would have been Bakugo, but he wasn't going to be there, and Izuku never really saw the others being too aggressive. But there was one thing. Kudash. Izuku swallowed and took a breath. Could you tell them not to call me Deku and not call me Midoriya? He looked Aizawa-san in the eyes, searching his teacher's face to see anything. Maybe to see if there was pity or even derision about his request. A request to change a simple nickname that had been said countless times. Teachers in the past would have probably said he was being too sensitive or that asking to not be called by his family name was just making things difficult. While Aizawa-san was not like his other teachers, that voice always whispered that it would be the same. Except Izuku didn't see that in Aizawa-san's face. Instead, he just nodded. I'll make sure to do that, Izuku. Shoyuta couldn't help but note that it felt like ever since Izuku had come back there had been a lot of talking. Of truly thinking about the words that were usually, for others, spoken so easily with no care. But when presented with your student who had been missing, out of your care, you find that you want to talk about a lot of things. Especially if that student was Izuku, who had experienced more things than you would care to think about. Sometimes Shoyuta worried that one of these days, these talks would push Izuku too far. He knew his student wanted to know what was happening. Shoyuta knew that it was better to have things in the open and let Izuku make a choice. But what if things became too much? Especially if they brought up Class 1A, where Izuku had been in close contact with a source of pain. Except the longer time passed, the more difficult it would be. So they decided to bite the bullet. It wasn't exactly nice to see the clear shock from Izuku. As if it didn't make sense that someone who attacked him had to deal with consequences. Including that the teacher who set the matchup was also punished or that a teacher apologized to him. It made Shoyuta more eager for Nedzu to hurry up his plans regarding the school that Izuku had gone to before coming to UA. He saw Izuku get nervous about the class seeing him again. He thought about the messages he and his students had sent. Shoyuta could admit that he wished that Izuku had responded. That feeling of not knowing, having no idea where his student had been horrible. He could imagine Izuku's classmates would be upset if they learned about it. But that wasn't his story to tell. It was clear that it was a stressful situation, one that Shoyuta still didn't know everything about given that Izuku had been open. He was holding back some information. So he would take this step by step, hoping that he didn't make too many mistakes. Hoping that Izuku would feel comfortable enough to trust them with the whole story. From the way, Izuku looked at him closely. Searching for something. It was clear that Izuku was trying to see if he should do that at all.